Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining another live. And today we're going to be discussing Michael Manley, Mia Mottley, and Fabian Socialism, the hidden ideology shaping the Caribbean. That's the title that we'll be looking at in this afternoon's program. Hope that you will join shortly. So this afternoon, we're examining a political philosophy that has had a profound influence on the Caribbean, particularly among leaders educated in Britain and connected to British intellectual traditions. Fabian socialism is what we'll be looking at today. We'll ask several important questions. What exactly is Fabian socialism? How did it influence Michael Manley in Jamaica? Did it influence Mia Mottley in Barbados, or has it influenced her? And perhaps most importantly, does Fabian socialism still offer solutions for the Caribbean in the 21st century, or has it evolved into something very different? What is Fabian socialism? Fabian socialism emerged in Britain during the late 19th century. The Fabian Society was founded in 1884 by a group of intellectuals who believed society should be transforming gradually rather than through violent revolution. Unlike Marxists, who often argued that capitalism would have to be overthrown through class struggle, Fabians believed change could occur through the democratic institutions, education, public policy, and incrementalism. That means that you would have reforms and not a violent revolution. The name Fabian comes from the Roman general Fabius Maximus, who defeated stronger opponents through patience and gradual pressure rather than direct confrontation. Now, some of the key Fabian thinkers included, we have Sidney Webb, Beatrice Webb, George Bernard Shaw, and we also had Graham Wallis. Later, many Labour Party leaders drew heavily from Fabian ideas. The philosophy emphasized strong public institutions, universal education, social welfare programs, state planning, progressive taxation, gradual social reform, a mixed economy rather than complete state ownership. So that's what they wanted, a mixed economy. So they were neither Marxists, neither were they avid capitalists. Fabianism and the Caribbean. We're going to look at now at Fabianism and the Caribbean. Many Caribbean leaders studied in Britain or were influenced by British political thought. As a result, Fabian ideas became deeply embedded in post-colonial Caribbean politics. Rather than seeking revolutionary socialism like Cuba, many Caribbean leaders pursued gradual reform through parliamentary democracy. This was essentially the Fabian model. Michael Manley and Fabian socialism. Michael Manley is perhaps the Caribbean leader most frequently associated with democratic socialism. As Prime Minister of Jamaica during the 1970s, Manley pursued policies aimed at reducing inequality and expanding opportunities for ordinary Jamaicans. His government introduced education reforms, land reform initiatives, work protections, expanded social services, greater state involvement in economic planning. Manley often spoke about social justice, economic democracy, and empowering the poor. Although he was influenced by broader socialist currents, many historians argue that his approach remained fundamentally democratic and parliamentary rather than revolutionary. His vision shared important characteristics with Fabian socialism, using the state to improve social outcomes. And that is what the state should be for, right? Protecting citizens against the marauding capitalists and those who would like to exploit the poor. Expanding opportunities for working people, reducing inequalities through public policy, working through elections and democratic institutions. However, Jamaica's experience was complicated by economic crisis, capital flight. So many of the middle class and the upper classes, they went abroad. They went to Canada, they went to the United States, and they went with their capital, which would have resulted now in the destruction of the Jamaican economy. Cold War tensions and pressure from international financial institutions. So we had the IMF that was there, and they were also imposing austerity, economic austerity on the island nation. Now, was Michael Manley's project undermined by external pressures, internal policy, mistakes, or both? Mia Mottley and Fabian influences. So we're going to look now, contrast Mia Mottley, and she's now the current Prime Minister of Barbados. Mia Mottley presents a more complicated case. She studied law at the London School of Economics. Historically, the London School of Economics, that's the LSE, has had strong connections to Fabian thought. In fact, the institution itself was founded by leading members of the Fabian Society, including Sidney Webb, Beatrice Webb, George Bernard Shaw, and Graham Wallis. Therefore, anyone studying at the LSE, that's the London School of Economics, inevitably encounters intellectual traditions influenced by Fabianism. I think that they were actually under the tutelage, that's Michael Manley. I'm not sure of Mia Mottley under the tutelage of Lasky, Harold Lasky. And he was the one who, sort of prepared them and tutored them in this sort of philosophy, economic philosophy, if you will. Now, Mottley's rhetoric often includes themes associated with social democracy, social inclusion, climate change, international inequality, poverty reduction, protection of vulnerable populations. However, critics argue that her economic policies are often closer to modern neoliberalism than traditional socialism. The neoliberal critique points to reliance on international financial institutions, fiscal discipline measures, private sector partnerships, and the market-oriented reforms, debt restructuring frameworks, encouragement of foreign investment. From this perspective, Mottley may employ the language of social justice while operating largely within a global economic framework shaped by markets and international capital. Supporters would respond that small Caribbean states have limited options and must balance social objectives with economic realities. The question is, therefore, is Mia Mottley a Fabian socialist, or is she a Fabian social democrat adapting to modern realities, or is she fundamentally a neoliberal leader using progressive language? This is what we are going to look at in this afternoon's program. Hope that you will join the program shortly and we can begin promptly. Now let's look at some of your greetings. We have here, education was there before Michael Manley. Education was there before Michael Manley. What do you mean by that? Education has always been there, but how was it in terms of, was it equal? Were there many people? Now, when Michael Manley actually took power after, independence, after our independence, he came in power in 1972. But after independence, Jamaica's illiteracy rate was at 80%. Right? So illiteracy was standing at 80%. So when Michael Manley came to power in 1972, the illiteracy rate was extremely high. Right? So I don't understand when you say education was there before Michael Manley, what you mean. Could you expound? Could you clarify what you mean by that? Fabian Society were the ones who invented Planned Parenthood. Well, that was one of the social programs, right, that they actually implemented. But let us be very now careful of how we look at these ideologies. There are times when people implement ideologies not because they believe in everything of the ideology, but they might think that there are things of that ideology that could be helped to build a nation state, right? And certainly Michael Manley was thinking of the socioeconomic inequality in Jamaica, and he thought that if he should if he should become prime minister, that he would make the society a much more equitable one. When we look at Jamaican society in the 1970s, we must understand that the higher classes, there was a wide gap between the rich and the poor, wider than we have today, right? And that is unthinkable to know that Jamaica is such a, entrenched classist society that in the 1970s, the economic gap between the rich and the poor was wider, right? So Michael Manley wanted to breach that gap, which of course the middle and the upper classes, the upper middle classes and the upper classes did not want him to do. Now, Fabian Society are very racist. Well, most of these ideologies, including Marxism, racist, right? So we have to look at, as I'm suggesting to you, we can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? Lots of the policies, ideologies that we use today are coming from Westerners, right? Many of whom were actually racist, right? But what we have to look at the policies that work for us and will help us to move forward as a society, right? So we're not suggesting here that we're just going to look and shred everything that came from Fabian socialism. What is important about that, and many people are using that in Europe, in England, in Germany, and most of Western Europe, that is the sort of idea that they use, Fabian socialism. And that's why you have the society, the welfare state, if you will, right? And people getting free medical health care, and they're merging capitalism with socialism. So that's what they're doing. It's a syncretic economy, eclectic, if you will, where they merge aspects of capitalism with socialism to protect the society from the sort of onslaught of these rabid capitalists who seek to kill and to plunder and to destroy, right? So that's what we want to look at, and we want to understand where that is coming from. Now, Fabian Society are the ones who came up with Planned Parenthood. They're a very racist organization. Yes, and I'm sure that they have aspects, as I was suggesting to you, racist aspect of the programs. But the ones that Michael Manley were implementing were not racist, if you will, right? We can't say anything. So we have to be able to look at ideologies and begin to what? To connect them to our reality. And part of what we see coming from the IMF is racist too, right? Let's look at the IMF programs. In fact, Miss Mia Mottley herself is on record of suggesting that these so-called first world countries, the developed countries, when they borrow from these institutions, they borrow at an interest rate of like 3%, 4%. When the global south borrows, they have to pay back an interest rate at 14%. Look at that. So that they're paying back 3 or 4 times the amount that the developed nations actually do pay back, right? So what we're seeing here, almost everything that we have in our society is racist. Now, but the fact of the matter, we are the ones now will have to come up with the ingenuity to devise programs that will be able to be beneficial to our people, right? So that's what we have to understand. Fabian Society are the ones who came up with Planned Parenthood. You're still saying the same thing. Yeah, so what's the point? Yeah, think I have a question. No matter what model, we are still under Uncle Sam and English. Yes, but it doesn't mean, therefore, that we are going to just, give in, right? The human spirit is one in which what? You try to outsmart as much as you can do, right? So we understand that the system is controlled, the system is rigged, but we can't just fold our hands and say that it's over, right? We've got to do the best that we can do under the circumstances, under the restrictions that we have. And that is what we're here to discuss in this afternoon's program. We don't want to come here now as people are giving up and there's nothing we can do, right? We understand that it's limited, but we also have to learn to devise ways and means, creative ways and means to move forward. Now, this is my Commonwealth countries are collapsing because of the Fabian Society. Look at the UK, they are deporting Jamaicans, but importing Muslims. Now the UK is a dump. But look at the United States. The United States is a capitalist society, hasn't adopted Fabian socialism for the most part, and it's collapsing. So all of the nation states are in fact collapsing. Now, what we're suggesting here is that Michael Manley did not devote everything to Fabian socialism, as we're suggesting that the part of Fabian socialism that he actually adopted was the fact that he was suggesting that the economy has to run in the interest of the masses of people who live in Jamaica. And that's what he was saying. And what was happening before, the society was not really running in those people's interests, right? It was being run in the interest of the capitalists and of the ruling elites, right? And he was trying now to bridge that gap, but he was trying to do it in a very diplomatic and also participatory way, parliamentary way, democratic way. And that is what we have to understand. Let's look at what what's her name has to say, some of what Beverly Anderson Manley was saying about Manley and her experience working with him as a wife and also colleague. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Hopefully you can hear it. And we can look at some of the thoughts that she shared. Now, we cannot now, lock our minds down. We've got to really understand that things are not black and white, their things are much more layered and more complex than sometimes we reason. If we think that this is evil and this is good, there's no good and bad theory. And there's no theory made by human beings which is going to be flawless. None, right? None. And that is what we have to understand. Okay, so let me just get here with her video, and we're going to put it up on the screen and listen to what some of her thoughts as she reflects on Michael Manley and his time in office. Okay, so let me get the volume up, and we can, not the volume, but the sound.
Negotiating all of those things. Talk about education, because there will be a lot of people who were looking at us here.
Let me know if you can hear.
Yes, for my generation, that is how you negotiated your way out of poverty.
Can you hear? Let me know if you can hear, guys.
Have a choice, because my mother, particularly my mother, Daddy was there to provide his salary as best he could. But my mother made it absolutely clear that there was no choice here. This is something you did. So as I say in the book, you could, if you went home with a B instead of an A, you got it from her. So from our early days, we were sent to like a prep school in Rollington Town. And every evening we came home, she'd go through the lessons with us and prepare us for the next day. And I was very fortunate that I had great educators. When I was going
Can you hear her?
Student.
Can you hear? Can you hear well? Can you tell me if you're hearing?
About. But they kept us in school, no matter what, because my father, when my father came into it in writing the book, when I look back at it, the role model he held out for us as a member of the People's National Party, a quiet member, was Norman Manley. This was the man who was our role model. He was Daddy's role model. Daddy wanted to be a lawyer, and if life had been different, that's what he would have chosen as a profession. My mother wanted to be a doctor. So for him, Norman Manley, and in those days, used to stress the man of integrity. So here was a man who was an intellectual, who was well schooled, and this is the model he wanted his girls to follow.
You got married to Michael Manley in 1972 after
the election.
After the election, but you you had a relationship. It started before then.
We lived together before.
Before then, 1972, the PNP comes to power. In a sense, you're marrying not just Michael Manley, you're marrying an exciting period in Jamaican history, and I dare say Caribbean history. Talk about, as you get into that experience, as 1970 comes and you're marrying Michael Manley. Talk about that within the context of class, which intrigues me a lot. In the context of race, and also in the context of party politics, as they would play themselves out.
How much time do you have?
Well,
all right. When he met me, I'd already been a personality on television and radio,
right.
So I'd established myself as a professional broadcaster.
And a model also.
And I used to model as well.
And
so my name was known.
Dance also.
Eh?
The dance theater.
No. I wasn't involved in that. I mean, dancing is a hobby and I love to dance.
Oh, okay.
But by the time he met me, I was already a name known in Jamaica. Beverly Anderson. And so where I was fortunate is that the years leading up to 1972, because Michael started campaigning in 1969, which is the year he became party leader when his father resigned. Now, that period from 69 up to 72, we were on the hustings together almost all the time. In the early days, I used to hide because he didn't want anything to upset the apple cart. And then when the news came out that we were now engaged, which came out before 1972, the victory, Jamaican society, who is our father? That was the first thing. he could marry anybody he wants, that kind of thing. And the PNP met about it and were upset about. I mean, people were. I got a certain amount of hate mail about it, and because at the time, you must remember, I had an afro. I was dressing in African clothes, and that was just not what the society saw for its first lady. So I went through a number of problems there. And also, one of the things that surprised me was the extent to which, after meeting Michael, I was really introduced to another world. Because although the Manleys never had wealth, as a matter of fact, they all died poor. But I mean, never had wealth, they had status in the society. One of the things I did for my master's was to research the whole of that period from the 1930s coming up, our modern political period up to 1944. And when you look at the literature, the Manleys, Norman and Edna, were held in high esteem. There are a few dignitaries who came to Jamaica from Britain, for example, who didn't pay a courtesy call on them. So they had the status. So I had to really learn how to be with that social class, which Michael himself rejected politically on behalf of the masses of the people, because what gave Michael his life was social justice and equity, egalitarianism. He never understood why people weren't just treated as people and why I couldn't treat people just equally. He couldn't understand it. But I was cast into another world of sit-down dinners and three-course meals and eating stuff that I'd never eaten before. And, I mean, it may sound ridiculous, but something
using instruments that you never used.
as I say in the book, those escargot instruments,
Yes.
But what was wonderful throughout it all is that I had his full support. I couldn't have done it if he was not the kind of individual who made me feel loved, protected, and supported wherever we went together. So we had all of those problems to do with class and race and all of them coming to the surface. And I have not died in Jamaica.
Right.
We're still one of the most class conscious. Talk about cleavage, which was a favorite word of Norman Manley's. The cleavage between the classes is still there. We don't like to think it is there, but it is still there. And it's part of the problems we're seeing in Jamaica right now. But in the 70s, it took on a particular hue, because here were we talking about, what we're really talking about is changing the balance of power in the society. Of course, we made mistakes. We were naive in a number of ways, but our intention was to change that balance of power in the society.
Democratic socialism. Talk a little bit about, for the audience who's not familiar with that period, in a nutshell, what was democratic
Well, it comes
socialism?
out of the history of social democracy in Europe. And as a matter of fact, for the Manleys, there were more Fabian socialists.
Yes.
And the essence, the part of Fabian socialism that I'd mentioned for this interview is a part to do with persuasion and consensus. In other words, whereas communists, Marxists believe in the class struggle. Just to give you one example, a democratic socialist would feel, and this was Michael really felt this, would feel that you could convince a social class to change its mind. So you could argue with somebody from the upper class and say, can't you see it just makes sense to open up yourself more to the working class? It may sound a little ridiculous, but in a sense, that's at the heart of Fabian socialism. His father believed in that. He believed in that. And because his background was in the trade union movement, where the whole thing is to do with compromise and consensus, that further strengthened his belief, because he had such great success in the trade union movement. It further strengthened his belief that with appropriate argument and putting the case of the underdog on the table, that you were able to solve problems.
How did that play out?
All right, let's look at some of what she is here suggesting. We're going to go back to her, right? But let us look at some of what she has described going on in Jamaica at the time when she became actually the wife of the first lady of the country. Now, she's suggesting, of course, that the class system, the racial component there in Jamaica was really strong. So when we say, for example, that Fabian, socialism is racist, we also have to also recognize that our own societies, the societies in which we grew up, is also racist, right? And that is what they were trying to maneuver through that society to see how they could ink out a better life for Jamaicans, right? And that is what Michael Manley's task was. Now, did he do a good job of it? It was an experiment. Remember now that when you're working with society in which people are very difficult to deal with, I'm trying to get back this thing down. People are very difficult to deal with. It's almost very difficult to bend the system. Then you will have to seek out ways in which you are going to be able to have a conversation. Now, the best way to have the conversation was to go through the parliamentary system and to have debates about what is happening in the society. That was what Michael Manley was trying to do. However, the class system and the racial components there were so deeply enmeshed in the society that it was very difficult for him to have that conversation. Nobody wanted to have that conversation. And in one point of the interview, David Hines was asking her that Jamaica was exploding. And she said that Jamaica wasn't exploding. Jamaica is still exploding. Why? Because she's suggesting that we have not yet still dealt with the racial and the class, deep entrenches of society. So as a result of that, we are still not doing and achieving what we could have achieved if we are to have that open dialogue, right? And that is what Michael Manley opened up, but it was not done because, of course, we had the CIA and other operatives, and the fact that many of the capitalist people, the upper elites, the upper echelons of society, left the country and left it with their wealth, and the society became very poor, right, as a result of that. So we have to look at these factors and make sure that we understand what was happening in the country at the time. Now, there is an interview that was done with Anthony Boggs, and he's a Jamaican scholar at Brown University. And he was asked, and he was also a friend of Michael Manley and one who worked with Michael Manley. So he was asked the question, can you paint a picture of the social and political environment that Michael Manley came of age in? On the one hand, there is the class and racial context in Jamaica, such as the color classism of the planter class. And on the other hand, there is the political unionism of the labor movement and its relationship to the two mass parties. Now, this is Anthony Boggs' response. Michael Manley was born in 1924 when Jamaica was still firmly in the grip of British colonialism. He was born to an upper middle class family, and his father was one of the most important lawyers in the entire Caribbean. His mother, who was born in the United Kingdom, became a widely revered artist and very important in Jamaica's artistic community. Both of his parents lived their lives according to a powerful ethic of public service. She was known for challenging the racial colonial representation of Black people in the colonies. One of her most important works was called Negro Aroused. Her father, Norman Manley, actively, or his father, not her father, but his father, Norman Manley, actively served working people alongside his list of very important clients. Living in London as a Rhodes Scholar, Norman Manley also developed Fabian Socialist ideological views. So that was coming from his father, right? His father influenced this sort of ideology. Now, in 1938, major workers' riots broke out across the country as well as across the Caribbean. The strikes prompted Britain's colonial office to reflect on how it would manage this emerging trade union movement. And prior to the 1938, we had the Universal Negro Improvement Association in the Caribbean, which was, of course, from Marcus Garvey, which was founded by Marcus Garvey. That is important because many Garveyites later joined the People's National Party. After the labor riots in the 1930s, we had the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union, that's the BITU, and the PNP led by Norman Manley, an organized labor movement, a nationalist anti-colonial movement. That was the political configuration of the time. So what we're seeing here is that we could see that there is a struggle between the class and race and also economic injustices and the breach between the rich and the poor. All of these things were happening at the same time. Now, how do you deal with these conflicts? Now, this is what Boggs continued to say. I have argued that the PNP was a mass anti-colonial movement that transformed itself into a political party in 1944 with the advent of universal adult suffrage. The BITU, which was by Bustamante, was a mass trade union movement linked to Bustamante, who was originally a member of the PNP. He was imprisoned for his union activities and left the party upon his release, forming the Jamaica Labour Party in 1943. So the union movement is attached to that party. And so when Bustamante leaves the PNP, Norman Manley and others in the PNP leadership of the Trade Union Congress as a counter to the BITU. So both parties in the 1940s were rooted in organized working class activities. You can say, following conventional labels, that the JLP is center-right and the PNP is center-left. But it's important to note that both parties engaged in a relationship with mass movements that no longer exist today. Now, something I want to also let you know is the fact that in 1952, because the PNP as we know it were made of different factions, right? You had that, then you had those who were at the center, those who were to the left, and some of whom were to the right. We've got to remember that these things, so you didn't have one party that you think was united, but you had a party that had different factions. Now, in 1952, because of the Cold War, the United States and Britain asked Norman Manley to get rid of the 4 H's, and they were called Richard Hart, Ken Hill, Frank Hill, and Arthur Henry. That's why we call the 4 H's: Hart, Hill, and Henry. Why? Because they wanted more of a Soviet Union style revolution, which of course the country did not want. Do you want me to continue with this thing, guys, or you're not interested in this Fabian Socialist? Because I want to waste my time with you. You said you wanted it. Do you want to remain? Do you want us to have a different conversation? Let me just be now fair, rather than beating up my gum and you're not here to listen to what we're talking about. Do you want to continue with this topic, or do you want another topic? You said you wanted Fabian Socialism. I did it. You asked me for it, so I'm presenting it. Do you want us to continue this conversation or something else? Let me hear from you, because I'm not going to waste my time. Let me hear if you want Fabian Socialism or you want us to deal with. I noticed that you don't want anything intellectual. So yeah, do we want? Okay, yes. So if you want it, then you remain, and if it's whatever, I just end the conversation, because this is a lot of preparation, a lot of things I had to be going on, and a lot of research. So if you don't want it, then I can just always end the live and go and do something productive. Okay. All right. So we had the 4 H's. We had Richard Hart, Ken Hill, Frank Hill, and Arthur Henry, who were evicted from the party because, of course, the Cold War. So we had in 1952, the People's National Party purged 4 prominent left-wing Marxist members from the party, often referred to as the 4 H's. They were, and I told you, Richard Hart, Ken Hill, Frank Hill, and Arthur Henry. Now, led by Norman Manley, who was Michael Manley's father, the PNP enacted this purge under pressure from Cold War era anti-communist sentiment and to realign the party toward moderate democratic socialism. So that is the sort of era that Michael Manley came out of. He was already under constraints from the beginning because he was not a communist. Michael Manley, as opposed to what many people say, was not a communist, right? He was more of a social democrat, as many of the prime ministers and presidents in Europe are. Right? He believes, as I'm saying, in this form of Fabian socialism, in that it is the only ideology that allows the parliament to have a combat, to have a debate rather, about how we are going to fix the injustices of our society. Now, either you're going to have that or you're going to have a communistic revolution like that which took place in Cuba. Now, which would you want? Do you prefer, or would you have preferred, were you alive at the time or living with those guys, or perhaps the leader of the country? Which would you have preferred? To have a communist revolution or to have a social sort of democratization of the country in which you will still have the parliamentary sort of debates, right? But you are trying to seek some sort of, yes, yes, some sort keep revisiting over the time because our government are quietly reducing funding on very important matters. Right. Let me share some of the ideas what you have here since I'm talking a lot. We are still in economic slavery. Yes, we are still in economic slavery because we are not having the discussions like these, David, again. We're not having discussions like these. We are still behaving as if we're living in free societies, and we put very important conversations under the rug. We throw them under the rug. Hence, we're not able to look at our problems, talk about them openly, and then we can find some form of solutions. This is what Michael Manley was trying to do in his era and did not accomplish. And I'm saying to our generation, his generation, and the generation after, and our generation have not yet begun to also understand, right? And had that conversation in terms of where we are and where we need to go. And that's what I'm saying, that I don't think another politician, the like of Manley, has ever come back to say that this is what we need, of his brilliance, of his intellectual acuity. Now, Marie's saying it's a little soft, but I can hear. That was the thing I played, right? Let's now move on to some of what you're saying. Good evening, everyone. And yes, let's remain on this topic. Yes, this is a very important topic, and we need to remain on it. I'm following, I'm learning. Yes, and that's the whole purpose of the live. And good afternoon, what's happening? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just trying here to respond to you as I'm doing my lecture. I came for the advertised topic. Okay, good, right, and that's what we'll stick to. So please make sure you're sharing the live and you are helping us to grow. I'm listening. It is something that we should certainly keep revisiting over time because our governments are quietly reducing funding on very important services. Absolutely. And that's the whole purpose that one of the things is that in the 1970s, and even in Eric Williams, Trinidad, and the authors of Barbados, and of course we have Maurice Bishop's. These are the things that they brought up. The only difference with Michael Manley is that he became very fiery with the United States and suggested that we are not up for sale, and he was more vociferous than you would hear the likes of, the Eric Williams. They did their social programs, but they did it under the wraps. Now, Michael Manley did say after he retired from political office that he regretted that he actually used such harsh rhetoric because pushed many people out of the country because they feared that Jamaica was moving towards communism and would have been another Cuba in the Caribbean. So many people, many of the wealthy elites left Jamaica and they went to the United States, to Canada, and some elsewhere, and left the nation state very, very impoverished. So these are some of the things that we're trying to look at. Now, let us go back to what's her name, to Beverly Anderson Manley, into terms of some of the things that she is actually highlighting to us, because this is a very important conversation, and we should revisit these things probably yearly. Maybe yearly we should be having conversations like this because it's important, and we're missing the history, and our people are hungry for knowledge. Okay, so let me put back her on the platform, and we'll continue with her talk with David Hines of Guyana. Is it on the thing? Why did it go back? Is it on the screen, guys? Can you tell me? Is it on the screen? Let me know if it's on the screen. Oh, it's not yet. It's not there. Okay, should be on the screen now. So let me put back her on the stage.
Democratic socialism now, you notice you said democratic because that's another thing. We were intensely democratic. Okay, we're talking about a bottom-up kind of democracy, it is true, but Michael Manley was anti-communist. No, this is
There's no sound? There's no sound? All right, let me stop it. All right, let me stop it and see if I can go. Oh, no sound. Okay, let me go back. Let me stop it and go back into the. Let me stop it. Let me stop it. I didn't see that you were telling me that there was no sound. So let me go back and see if I could get it back on the screen and rewind it. Oh, Lord. All right, let me see if I could. I might have to come out. I might have to come out. Okay, I'm going to now rewind it and we're going to go back to it because you weren't hearing. And let me know if you're hearing, because that's the only way that I can know if you're hearing. So let me now put it back up, share the screen, and put it back on the screen, and then have you listen to it. Because she's sharing some gems here that we have to revisit. So let me go back, and I might need now to rewind it. Go back to 14. Okay, and I'm going to now play it. Okay, so let me go now and play this. Okay, let me put back the sound and let me know if you're hearing, because I can't know if you're not.
People went into shock. The elections were called almost 2 years early before 1982 because you realized things were untenable. So democratic socialism, and this is how the PNP started out, around a coalition of classes, that everything we believed in had to be built around a coalition of classes, but that the class that must predominate,
It's no video. There's no video.
word for word, was definitely the
There's no
majority
video
of people who were marginalized in the society.
Oh, okay.
So democratic socialism was democratic.
But I'm seeing it on the screen.
Part of it was because you're bringing people up and trying to.
All right, let me stop sharing it again, and let me try again. Let me try to reshare because okay, share a screen, and this is it. Let me. Okay, let me put it back on the screen.
Is exploding because a number of those issues we have not put closure, been able to put closure on a number of those issues, maybe because we are still close. It may not seem that way, but we're still close to that decade when it's very difficult for opposing factions.
Oh, it's not. I'm not sure why the video is not yet there.
About what really happened. We have not been able to put in place any mechanism to create that space for the conversation.
Let me rewind it, ladies and gentlemen. Okay.
Some kind of indigenous
Let me rewind it now.
reconciliation thing. And P met about it.
Let me rewind it and we. Okay, let me start from here.
Where the whole thing is to do with compromise and consensus.
Can you see the video now? Can you see? Are you seeing now?
Because he had such great success in the trade union movement, it further strengthened his belief that with appropriate argument and putting the case of the underdog on the table, that you are able to solve problems.
How did that play out in the Jamaican experience?
Democratic socialism now, you notice you said democratic, because that's another thing. We were intensely democratic. Okay, we're talking about a bottom-up kind of democracy, it is true, but Michael Manley was anti-communist. No, this is the irony. People were calling him, he was really anti-communist, and this is why when he called those elections, people went into shock. The elections were called almost 2 years early before 1982 because you realized things had got untenable. So democratic socialism, and this is how the PNP started out, around a coalition of classes, that everything we believed in had to be built around a coalition of classes, but that the class that must predominate, to almost quote Norman Manley word for word, was definitely the the majority of people who were marginalized in the society. So democratic socialism was democratic. The socialism part of it was because you are bringing people up and trying to get some kind of equality and equity going in this society, and hopefully lessening the class tensions in the society. But of course, we're in the Cold War.
Right, and that's how I come to. That now comes into conflict with the realities of the Cold War, and Jamaica explodes. And you are in the middle of it.
And you say Jamaica explodes in the 70s. Jamaica is exploding because a number of those issues, we have not been able to put closure on a number of those issues. Maybe because we are still close. It may not seem that way, but we're still close to that decade when it's very difficult for opposing factions to even have an honest conversation about what really happened. We have not been able to put in place any mechanism to create that space for the conversation, some kind of indigenous truth and reconciliation thing. We just have not been able to do it. Bipartisan talks, yes, do take place between the two political parties now, but those are more formal talks. But a lot of the underlying issues, particularly to do with social class and race, we have still not been able to deal with in Jamaica.
You talk in the book about the left wing of the party and the right wing of the party. And for those of us who follow that period, we knew that there were tensions.
Oh, yes.
But the way you presented the book, it gave me a new insight into that. Talk a little bit about those two wings of the party.
Yeah, from its inception, the PNP had a left wing,
yes,
a center, and a right wing. As a matter of fact, one of the things that plagued Norman Manley under British colonialism with the then governor, who became not a friend, but somebody you could at least have discourse with, and somebody who was absolutely baffled by the intellectual capacity of a Norman Manley. I mean, it just freaked them out that he could talk to them at the level he was talking to them. And the governor often said to him, why don't you just get rid of the left wing? They're causing you so much trouble. And his exact words were, they're often a foil, this is a quote from Norman Manley, for the sleepy center. No, I quote that to say that to understand Michael Mann and his politics, you have to understand his father. He was very clear that he had a legacy to carry on. When Norman handed the baton over to him after he was elected leader, his exact words were, my mission was to deal with the political independence. Yours is to deal with the social and economic independence. So in other words, this continuity, father to son, leader to leader, was always present in Michael's mind. The other thing I want to say before coming to your exact question is that the left wing was purged in 1952. Michael Manley never forgot that. He knew the pain it caused his father. Some people say his father never really recovered. He knew the pain it caused the party in trying to rebuild the party, because a lot of the popular base of the party was directed towards these left-wing leaders who were also very hard-working people. Michael said, under my leadership, this party will never split. And I can tell you, it is something that guided him from day to day. So he became what Rex Nettleford, it's amazing, Rex's name has come up for the third time, described his father as a compromiser, balancer. And in a sense, that's what Michael had to become. Because although he was leaning to the left, definitely, because without Michael Manley, those of us in the left couldn't even open our mouth. We needed his protection. But he had to be always remembering that there was a right wing, many of whom would have been more comfortable in the JLP at the time. And there was a center. So he was working all the time to keep us all inside the party, because the thought of the party splitting, I think it would have killed him. Because he came back to Jamaica, after being a student, immediately after that split, and was one of the people who started to rebuild the groups at the base of the party, particularly in Kingston and St. Andrew, where because of the expulsion of the left, the party's strength had been deeply eroded. So all the time sometimes it was like you had 3 different parties. It was not unusual for a right-wing member to say in the executive, are we going communist? Which is the same question somebody would ask from the outside. So you had all of these, again, you have to contextualize it in terms of the Cold War. You had all of these going all the time with everybody knowing where Michael's heart was. And of course, there was I, right beside him, learning the politics at his feet, and moving more and more to the left.
Mhm.
So, that would have to cause some tensions in the marriage.
Yeah, exactly.
And I noticed in the beginning you call a lot of things and you left love for the last. You should have started with love.
No, one of the things about the book is that you quite deftly interwove the love and the politics.
The personal is the political.
Exactly. And if I were to say the primary strength of the book, it's that.
Thank you for saying that's very important to me, because people often think that these are opposite poles. They're not.
No.
The personal is the political.
Yeah.
And I always say the reason, if there's a reason for our divorce, it should be ideological differences or political differences.
And I think you managed to bring that through, that there were other reasons, but those reasons were
those
not
are the fundamental ones.
The primary reason.
Yes.
You went back to university. Or went to university. Went to university when you were first lady, in your 30s.
Oh boy.
And you described that experience.
Even now, it was probably one of the more courageous things that I did. I'd always wanted to do it. But when I discussed it with Michael, he said, listen, you go for it. He was so supportive. But going on campus with young people pointing and saying, is she? Is not she? Is she? Is not she? And I think I say it in the book where his chief security man said to me, why are you bothering to go back to university? Everybody think that you go there already. In other words, there's a kind of embarrassment about a first lady who was not going to do a first degree.
Yes.
But, I did that, went on to my master's and so on. But that first semester was extremely traumatic for me.
You presented Michael Manley, you, in a sense, as I would put it, you unmasked him. Because for a lot of us who admire Manley across the region, here was this person who was larger than life.
I hope it didn't make you admire him less.
No.
As presenting him as a human being, which is something I had to learn, by the way.
Right.
I had to learn for myself that this is a human being. And many of us, I think I can certainly speak for myself, who followed him, often forgot that.
Mm-hmm.
And not just a human being, but a human being who was extremely courageous, who went against his class thing until his own class was upset with him, but was never quite making it in the working class. It's almost, it was a very, very difficult time for him. And so he was just exhausted.
Would you agree that by the time he died, he had moved back to the left? I mean, I saw him in an interview in Life and Death, for example. I think his daughter was one of the producers.
Sarah.
He was so pained.
He was pained.
Yeah.
I think he would have more been pained, not so much because he had moved back to the left, but the whole world had shifted on him, but because he would have had some regrets about the outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
He was an outcome person. He was a person who thought about the future. He even had a group at one stage, nothing but think about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And to leave Jamaica, to leave the party the way he left it, I think that is some of what you're picking up in that interview in Life and Death.
Mm-hmm.
And particular, his whole relationship with IMF, or lack of, that really took over his life towards the end of the 70s.
You mentioned IMF.
Mm-hmm.
Very important, not just political, but
all right. Let's stop here and let's look at some of the things that she has, brought forward. Discuss some of the things that some of her claims, some of her experiences living in that society, in that racist and class-ridden society. Okay, and she's suggesting still that classism still has not ended; it's still ongoing. So there are things that we also have in our societies that we have to get rid of, right? We cannot grow as a people if we do not leave some of the inherited, legacies of slavery and colonialism, which many of us still don't want to do. Look at the fact when she said she went to university, that many of our own people were asking her, why were you here? What are you doing at university? You shouldn't have come. You should have pretended as if you had already gone. Yesterday I was watching also a brief clipping of a video of a Jamaican who lives in Trinidad, and she's back there, visiting her parents. And she was saying that while she is in Jamaica, she notices that she always has to save face, right? Because there is she visiting the country from Trinidad, right? And her neighbors are asking her, seeing her like she's doing a walk. She's walking every morning. And they're asking her, why are you walking? Why don't you drive? Because if the people see that you're walking, they will think that you're poor, right? That you don't have a car. And she's reflecting and she's having to say to herself, but this is a sort of life I would not want to live here in Jamaica. I would rather remain in Trinidad rather than going back to Jamaica, where people are constantly watching you and you have to save face, you have to behave a certain way to suit the society. Now, if we do not rid ourselves of these slave colonial sort of behavior, then we can't move forward as a people. Right? We can blame the IMF, we can blame the US all we want, we can blame anything, external factors, but there are some things that we also have to look into ourselves and say, what's going on with this? Another thing is the class and the colorism in our society. Many Black females are still today, just like Beverly Anson Manley, saying that lighter skinned men in the Caribbean do not regard them, right, because of their skin tone. They would rather marry to somebody who is a lighter skin tone than somebody who is darker, because she does not represent to him, in his side, a symbol of progress, right? And this is what Beverly Anson Manley went through, right, in the 1970s. So that still has not changed. We're still suffering from mental slavery and from relics of the past, because the society, including Black people, were asking her when she got married, when she was going to marry to him, what is he doing? Why is he marrying such a commoner? In other words, he should be marrying either, because Michael Manley was married 5 times. For the context of things, he was married 5 times, including to white women and lighter skinned women. So her now being his, I think was his 3rd or 4th wife, I think she was the 4th, right? And being a dark skinned, it was a problem. It was a problem even for some working class Jamaicans. So how do we look, internalize, and say to ourselves, how are we contributing to our demise? Because we still see Western values, we still see Western physical appearance as the norm, as the standard, right? And that is why our politicians sometimes, when the IMF and these people go to them, they actually capitulate, because they still see them as symbols of authority that need to be listened to. Nobody is willing to say, like a Michael Manley, we are not for sale. We are not for sale. But she mentioned that the democratic socialism does not mean communism. What it simply meant was that they were going to use the democratic process, right, to improve on the social conditions in the country, done in a democratic way, where the institutions remain intact. You debate them so that you can convince your opponent and let them know that these things must be dealt with, or society cannot move forward. To this day, Jamaica has not dealt with all of the problems that she has stated. And that's why she says that Jamaica is still imploding, and that is, or exploding. That is why you have the high crime rate, mass migration, mass illiteracy, and these are things that are still being dealt with, but they're telling us that the market-driven economic policies will help us to do so, and that's not. Let's go to you now, because I'm talking too much. Z says the video is there, but you may need to make it whole screen. Yeah, so once you saw it, that's important that you got what she's saying there. It's there, but you can't see the person. You can see the person speaking? You could not see the person? I was seeing it on the screen. Did you not see the person? The message is there, so you should know we should know the problem. Yeah, that's important. That message is, that's what we want to get. Then we have Chris is saying Life and Death was a really good documentary. It was. And she mentioned that, he was pained, the one. You could see that he was pained because he himself had to capitulate. He had to submit to the market forces, the marketeers, and eventually gave up his vision for Jamaica, thanks, of course, to the domestic elites and also the United States of America and their foreign policy. Now, Donnie Calendar is saying, as a child growing up in Barbados, Michael Manley was seen as a colossus, one to be emulated. He was. And let us say here, Michael Manley, as Beverly Anderson Manley said, was a human being. So he was flawed. And I think that many people, including those who admire him, including Jamaica, think that he was flawless. And but he was flawed, and he admitted that. Right? He admitted that, when he retired. But the fact of the matter is that we need to understand that the important thing about Michael Manley is that he was able to begin a conversation that is so difficult to have, and even to this day is still difficult to have. And we refuse to have these conversations, but then we're think that our economy and our system is going to improve. Right? And it's not going to improve. It's not going to change until we have these critical conversations. As she suggested to, many of these conversations are had at school for exams. So we're talking about exams and passing exams, right? So they talk about racial things, but they're not open conversations that we need to have, right? They're not frank enough. And they're also had at the political level where, of course, it's formally done. That is what she's suggesting, and she's right. Jesus is saying mindset developed countries, not industries. Look at Nigeria, Jamaica versus Singapore and Norway, all developed because of mindset of putting the people and country first. Well, Michael Manley, to a great extent, was putting the country first. And why aren't we still developed, or why weren't we developed during that time? Because there are other forces and factors that we have to look at too, right? Now, Jamaica has never been a cohesive society. For those of you who think Jamaica is cohesive, has never been. For some reason, Jamaica has not yet learned to be a cohesive society. As a result of that, because of the division, and she's suggesting because of the class and the racial dynamic in that society, then we will never. Haiti, it's almost similar to Haiti. Never united, right? Barbados is, for some reason. Trinidad was able to do that in spite of the racial, problems there. And some people are asserting that it could be the language problem. I don't know, for whatever reason. It surprises me that Jamaica has held up so long, right? Because we ride over problems, move on, and expect better, right? And that is something that is a sign of mental illness, if you should ask me, right? Jesus is saying Jamaicans have a sell-out mindset, same with the politicians, absolutely. Remember now that it's also not very simple, right? They're very complex issues, and that is why we have to have these discourses. Now, this is me personally. Any politician who breaks his or her promise of fidelity to his or her spouse cannot keep promises to the strangers, right, who vote for him or her. And this is a very good point. This is a very good point. How could Michael Manley, as you're saying, be, loyal to his people and was married 3 times? Right? He was married 3 times, and all the marriages always end up in divorce, as is obvious. So was Michael Manley a strong person? Was he a strong leader? Or is it because he just had fantastic ideas? These are some of the things that we also need to look at. Were these ideas practical, pragmatic? Or were they because he had a creative imagination, he was able to think these things, and because he was so eloquent and so handsome and charming, people believed him for what he was saying, because he could speak. One of the things, complex matters, and Michael Manley made them look like they're simple, right? Well explained, right? And he had a sense of clarity second to none, right? So many people believed him and trusted, because words have effect, words are powerful. Right? And if we can manipulate people through words, through our speaking, then people will listen. And sometimes it might not be the best. But we can't knock him. But that was one of his flaws, right? And he was a man. That's why he was a man. Chris is saying, from what I understand, the CIA did some operations on Jamaica, which is bad news. Yes, and that is one of the things. And we want to discuss also that, Michael Manley was up against external forces. However, if you are up against external forces, that is when the unity of the country is most important. And I am not sure if we were more united, if perhaps the CIA could have done what they did. right? Now, it was interesting to note that, Beverly Anderson Manley also mentioned in another video that the CIA director, then it was, what's his name again? The known CIA director. It wasn't the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. The then Secretary of State of the United States, Henry Kissinger, went to Jamaica to speak to Michael Manley. Now, do you know that Henry Kissinger went to Ocho Rios and called the Prime Minister from Jamaica House, summoning him to meet him in Ocho Rios in a hotel? And it was Beverly Anderson Manley who said to him, "No way, Jose, no way, because you can't be the Prime Minister of Jamaica and you have the Secretary of State of another country coming to call you, summoning you to go to see him in a hotel. He should come to see you in Jamaica House, at Jamaica House." And that's exactly what he did. But what's her name? Beverly Anderson Manley was a very courageous woman. And yes, I think if we were more united, Chris, I think we could have done much more. But Jamaica society has never been united and never seemed that it will ever be. Z saying the depth of colorism in Jamaica literally stunned me when I discovered about it. Yes, it is maybe the most, and including Haiti society, the Haitian society too. It might be the most racist society, and it's hard to say that because Jamaicans think that they live just like Brazil, think that we live in a racial democracy where people don't see color and they don't see race and they don't see a lot of things, and they do. And that is why you have the bleaching going on in Jamaica, even to this day, because we have not yet had these difficult conversations. We decide that we don't need to have them, and then we blame other people for our own demise, right? So we also have problems, and we have to look at our internal problems, right? Siaga worked with the CIA to destroy Jamaica, right? He was, of course, he was on the other side of the aisle, and he did. It wasn't Alan Dulles. It was actually Henry Kissinger, who was the then Secretary of State. It was Alan Dulles who was the CIA director, right? It was the Secretary of State of the United States who visited Jamaica and asked and summoned the Prime Minister to meet him at in Ocho Rios. I mean, how dare him? The Prime Minister has a house, has a residence, and he should go to Jamaica House to see him. Alan Dulles was one of the early CIA directors. Yeah, perhaps he was at the time, but it was not him that I was referring to. Trevor saying the colorism in Jamaica is so real that they bleach themselves into yellow paper think characters and think it looks good. And because, as I'm suggesting, that is what is the epitome of success to them. That is what success represents in Jamaica, that you have to be that sort of color, you have to be light. And we know you have the uptown, downtown sort of scenario in which, in the uptown and the wealthy people are more the brown, light looking class, right? The light colored people, while downtown represent the masses of Black Jamaicans, right? Dark skinned Jamaicans. So there is a rift there. And these are some of the things that Michael Manley, and perhaps that's one of the reasons he got married to Beverly Anderson Manley, because he wanted, it was then the Black Power movement. We must understand too that when Michael Manley came to power, it was under the time of the Black Power movement, was to be black is to be beautiful, right? Notice that she had her afro, right? That was Beverly Anderson Manley. And in those days, it was like embarrassing for women. You better believe it. We think we're not living the same time that we're living in right now, because Black Power movement was saying that to be black is to be beautiful, and you can have your hair, your natural hair. At that time, you could not have natural hair and work in the bank, right? If you were to work in the banks in the Caribbean, you had to process your hair, because that was not the way how things was done. So we have improved to some extent, but superficially, there are some underlying factors in the Caribbean, not only in Jamaica, that still need to be dealt with. Maurice Bishop, Achilles' heel, was also his open relationship with Jacqueline Creft. But we Caribbean people don't like that conversation because of our colonial sexualization. Absolutely. And it's also not a thing in Jamaica that if you have lots of women too, the society respects you. Another thing that we need to look at also, because remember now that Michael Manley was the one who actually ended the bastardization of children. In Jamaica, it was a shame for children to be born out of wedlock. So what happened is that they would not get some of the opportunities, or the society did not look at them as, equal, right? They were seen or regarded as bastards. So did we change our sort of value system to, no, don't get me wrong, I think that children should get what they need, right? And we should not discriminate in terms, because a child can be born out of wedlock and come up to be a great person. But it seems to me that the Caribbean has also, including Jamaica, have made this a norm. We have normalized, right, having lots of women, right? Man, we have enough gal, right? And that is the sort of thing, and it has sort of damaged our culture in terms of the family structure, and have brought us back to the plantation, because that's what we were seen as, right? Just, having children, getting women pregnant, right? For them to procreate and have more children for the slave masters. Now, we have cartel did a lot of damage by furthering the bleaching as attractive. Absolutely. He did that, right? He definitely did that. And right, and that is so true. Right, so this is what, so let us go now to Mia Mottley. I think we've spent a lot of time on Michael Manley. Now, Miss Mia Mottley also studied at London School of Economics, right? And she has done, she's now being seen, I should say, people see her as the second, as it were, if not Michael Manley in persona. She represents that image of this fearless Caribbean personality, this Caribbean politician. Now, do you see her as one of a Michael Manley ilk? Now, historically, Fabian socialism and neoliberalism pull in different directions. Fabian socialists generally argue that the state should actively shape economic outcomes, reduce inequality, regulate markets, which we need to regulate now, because right now the government cannot regulate any market, or they're saying we should leave it up to the market, right, to the system, and that is what is stealing our wealth. Reduce inequality, regulate markets, and provide strong public services. Neoliberals generally place greater faith in markets, private investment, deregulation, fiscal restraint, and integration into the global economy. So if a politician simultaneously presents themselves, like Mia Mottley, as a champion of social justice, which she does, while pursuing policies that rely heavily on market solutions, foreign investment, privatization, or austerity measures, critics may see that as a contradiction, which it is. However, modern politicians like Mia Mottley don't view themselves as choosing one camp exclusively. They often argue that they are pursuing social goals through market-based means. Their position might be, we need economic growth, investment, and fiscal discipline to generate the resources needed to fund social programs. Now, what do you guys believe? Once you accept the neoliberal framework, social justice becomes secondary to the interests of the investors, creditors, and international financial institutions. They don't care. They don't care what you think about your people. That's a debate that extends far beyond Mia Mottley. Similar criticisms have been directed at leaders across the Caribbean, Europe, Latin America, and even the traditional social democratic parties of Britain and Scandinavia. By the way, if you notice that Trump is now trying to demolish the Western European nations by telling them that they can't think about their people right now. What they have to do, they have to invest in their defense, in securing their borders, because according to him, you have too many immigrants going to Europe, and they have to change that culture by investing more in the military. Now, what they don't know, well, the prime ministers there do know, but what the people don't understand is that the United States, because of investing in defense for so many years, it has impoverished the people of the country. So what is happening in Britain right now, Great Britain, is that you're having many prime ministers not being able to balance the budget and also to invest in the military. And that is why you saw that Keir Starmer had to go. And many of them are going to go more, because what is happening, they will not be able to balance people's lives while balancing the budget. And that is the question that we need to ask ourselves. Why are we so poor? Why are we investing in many other things rather than investing in the people? Why are we investing in the IMF? The IMF is not helping our people, right? And these are some of the things that Michael Manley was trying to ask, and we were not ready for the conversation. And I think that to some extent, we still are not ready for that conversation. Now, can a leader genuinely be committed to Fabian ideals while operating within a neoliberal global economy? I wanted to answer this question. Can a leader genuinely be committed to Fabian ideals while operating within a neoliberal global economy? Or does the acceptance of neoliberal policies inevitably undermine those ideals? That is what I want to ask you. Do you think Miss Mia Mottley is correct when she is just looking at the fact that, look here, I have to deal with the realities, and the reality is that we have to be able to function in this global market, right? In this global economy. Now, Z saying, Andrew, you forgot my question. Where does Michael Manley rank out of all the prime ministers? Did colorism play a major role in his popularity? I don't think colorism, played a big role in his, because I don't think, to be frank, his father, who is Norman Manley, I don't think he was as popular, right? And he was also a brown man as Michael Manley. I think that Michael Manley, to be fair to him, his popularity was that the people thought that he was genuine. And I think he was, right? I think they thought that he was genuine, that he really wanted to develop the economy in the interest of the ordinary citizen. And that is what made him so famous, and the history books will always have him there. And I want to think that's what made even Eric Williams. They all have their flaws, don't get me wrong, but I think that what made Eric Williams of Trinidad still famous in Trinidad is the fact that people thought that he too was genuinely sought to build the people. Now, don't get me wrong, as I'm saying, these two men were flawed and they had their flaws, and people come and say, oh, but he did this and he did that. Okay, yes, I understand that. But when it comes on to wanting the best, Eric Williams had the popular, what you call it now, street or whatever, university, right? Right there in Trinidad, where he taught his people, and he invested a lot in education. If Jamaica had done similarly to what Eric Williams did in Jamaica, Jamaica would be way ahead. So yes, I think I think too that he is the most popular. I would say that Michael Manley to date is the most popular prime minister that Jamaica has ever seen, and perhaps will ever see in independent Jamaica. In modern Jamaica, I don't think that there's anyone who's going to come to outrank him as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he is one of the tops in the Caribbean, but certainly in Jamaica, he is top. He's number one. Then we have, do you know that many people in his party, they continue to be loyal to the party just because of Michael Manley? Some of them don't even like the leader of the PNP, of which Michael Manley was a part, but they still remain PNP and loyalists. They remain PNP loyalists to this day because of what Michael Manley did, what their remembrance of what he did when he was in power. Chris is saying the US and Canada have gone too far down the neoliberal road. That's exactly right. US infrastructure gets a grade of D. It's so low quality. Absolutely. And that is what he's trying to do in Europe. And the prime ministers there, like the Keir Starmer, who is now retired, who resigned, he had to deal with these things. And many of them will have to deal with a lot of revolutions in Europe because they're not accustomed to the austerity that we in the Caribbean are accustomed to. So we can tell them that welcome to the brave new world, because we are knowledgeable, we are experienced, we were the ones who had to carry that weight. For all these years, we had to suffer austerity, while the Europeans were the ones who would, enjoy life at our expense, if you believe me. Now here, Miss Mia Mottley here, she has said something here, and some of what she says are correct, right? So again, we might say Miss Mia Mottley is this and she's that. Even though I don't trust her, but there are things that she says that are true, and there are things we must be able to look at the message and not sometimes at the messenger. Right, so let's analyze what she's hypocritical, don't get me wrong, but some of what she says here. So let's look at what she's saying here in the UK Guardian newspaper. Barbados Prime Minister announces manifesto for slavery reparations. This is what Ms. Mia Mottley is saying. Updated document which emphasizes harm done to African women is being considered by other Caribbean countries. And she's the face of climate change, as you know. She's now the Michael Manley of the Caribbean, if you will, Miss Mia Mottley. Barbados' Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, has announced a new manifesto from Caribbean leaders, asserting the moral, ethical, and legal case for reparations over damage caused by hundreds of years of enslavement. Now, listen to what she says. Mottley was speaking at a historic conference in Ghana to advance the push for reparatory justice after the United Nations adopted a landmark resolution declaring the trafficking of enslaved Africans as the gravest crime against humanity. The manifesto, which she distributed at the conference, is an update of the Caribbean Community CARICOM 10-point plan for reparations from former colonial powers. It introduces new issues, including the disproportionate impact of slavery on girls and women. Okay, that's interesting. And that is true. We know that many of our women were raped. So she has a point, right? The plan includes a new specific call for compensation for gender-based violence, referencing data that suggests women represented approximately 30% of the estimated 20 million Africans forcefully transported across the Atlantic Ocean. So she's saying that 30% of the estimated 20 million Africans who came here to the Americas were women. It also mentions estimates that at least 1.2 million enslaved women experienced sexual violence. That's a lot, 1.2 million. How did they arrive at that figure? I don't know. Highlighting the update, Mottley said that the compensation for gender-based violence and assault on family is no different from the compensation that has been awarded to other nationalities, such as the Japanese. The draft, which has been seen by the Guardian newspaper, asserts that climate justice and slavery reparations are inextricably linked. Now, do you believe that, ladies and gentlemen? Do you think that slavery and climate change should be put together, should be interlinked? I don't think so. What do you think? Let me hear from you. I want you to tell me if Mia Mottley is right in terms of linking slavery, the injustice of slavery, to climate justice, right? Because in the first place, in my opinion, in my own humble opinion, slavery could have been avoided. It was controlled, right? It was predictable. You're doing something to humans, they're going to die, they're going to suffer human suffering. But climate isn't something that is beyond our control, isn't it? Let me hear from you. Let me hear what you're saying. So let me go back to Miss Mia Mottley. Mia Mottley is just what you said, an image but full of wind. She's not a revolutionary and definitely not for the better. Definition of a plant installed with lots of marketing working as a globalist. And this is the difference between the politicians of yesteryear and the politicians of today. Notice that Beverly Anderson Manley said that Michael Manley died poor, right? Including his father. They weren't rich. They were very respected as educated Jamaicans, but they were not rich people. Why? Because the politics of yesteryear was different. You didn't go there because you wanted to acquire wealth. You went there because you wanted to be a symbol of change for the people. You wanted to revolutionize the society in which the people lived. That's why you went into political office. Now the politicians are coming into political office because they are celebrities. That's another thing. I mean, back in the days, they never had internet and social media to put them on the stage and for them to be always in the limelight, as you see in today's political realm, right? So you are correct. You're right about that, Trevor. The life of Dell is saying one step that you can try and do is to get out of the SWIFT system, stop using the dollar. Now, how do we do that? That would be it's a good advice. But at the same time, how are we going to get ourselves out of the American system? Now, that is what Michael Manley tried to do also. And when he came back into power in 1989, as Beverly was saying, that he found that the world had run and left him, and they had run, gone, left him, right? So he was behind. How do we get out of the dollar system? That's the question. How do we? Right? Easier said than done, isn't it? And that is what Michael Manley was doing too. He had some great ideas, But in terms of implementing these ideas, it was a different question, which he was not able to do, and the economy actually faltered. And Jamaica's economy has not grown for a very long time. The country has not grown, has not improved since Michael Manley left office, really. Right? The country is going downhill every day, and they continue to well, the current prime minister behaves as if the country is doing well, but the country is not doing well. And one of the reasons is, as I told you, lots of the capital went to America. Lots of Jamaica capital went to America, to Canada, and other countries. So the country there is without any economic industrial base. It cannot grow. It will never grow. Right? You see, saying that's exactly the situation in Barbados. The neo-imperialist agenda is a joint venture. Right. But bear in mind, I still want you to ask the question, if you were in power, what would you do differently than what Miss Mia Mottley is doing? Do you think you would have been able to chart a different course? We all know that she is hypocritical. We all know that she is not leading Barbados in the right direction, just like Andrew Holness is not moving Jamaica in the right direction. But what would we do, or what can she do differently than what she's doing now, given the realities of the world? We also have to be fair, even though we can critique what our ministers are doing. Okay, so but let's also be balanced and fair. Now, Mottley recent presidents all have one thing in common: ego and wanting. Absolutely, they have too much ego to be seen as real radicals when nothing they do is against the system and rewards them for playing that part, giving hope in vain. Now, you're correct, 100% correct. I think the difference between a Michael Manley and Mia Mottley, Michael Manley was 100% genuine but flawed, right? Michael Manley was 100% genuine but flawed. Now, I would prefer, if you should ask me, somebody to make a mistake but genuinely saying that and apologizing that, did not know, whatever, than somebody who tells me that you're doing a great job, or I'm doing a great job, and it's not done, it's not a great job, and at the end of the day I fail, right? So I think that's what Miss Mia Mottley is doing. She's giving the Barbadians and the world, the global south, this illusion that she is on the stage to protect them and to vouch for their freedoms when she's actually vouching for their enslavement. And that is the dangerous point. Michael Manley was never trying, or the authors of Barbados and Maurice Bishop's, they were flawed, but they weren't trying to enslave their people. These are the two different things, the two different sort of personalities and characteristics of our politicians of yesteryear and the ones of today. Please like the video, please, and share the video so people can get on the platform. This is a very important conversation we are having in the Caribbean, and it needs to be had. Mottley says that those things, because they have a monetary attachments, climate change, reparations, she's digging for oil, encouraging legal human trafficking, aka open borders with low pay, etc. And that is the point, Trevor. My thing, if Miss Mia Mottley and all of these prime ministers want to free us, they will have to deal with the IMF injustices. They will have to do with as they're trying to do, the reparatory justice in terms of having us get back money, but money that should be built to build, like, hospitals, schools, industrial, businesses, whatever. But for her to just talk about climate change and linking climate change to slavery, I don't like that. Remember now that in America, when they wanted to cover up not talking about slavery, what did they do to co-opt that agenda? They used the LGBTQ agenda. Notice that? So you have in America, people describe LGBTQ agenda to Black agenda, and the two are not the same, right? Race is different from sexual orientation, right? And that's what they're doing now. So what they're doing now, they are muddying the water, and they are confusing the reparatory justice with climate. I hope you're understanding that. So when they're telling us about this, climate change, what they really want is for the reparations that should be given to Black people be given to the climate advocates. if you will. And we will not be getting that money, right? And this is what they do. And that is why we have to make connection, because the same thing they did when Black Americans were trying to say slavery and racism have not ended in America. It's still there. Let's talk about LGBTQ. And they co-opted that sort of conversation, right? So I hope you're realizing. And Miss Mia, I didn't say it. This is coming from Miss Mia Mottley. She says that she's saying that slavery and reparatory justice are the same. She asserts that climate justice and slavery reparations are inextricably linked, and stresses the need for a plan to support indigenous people who were in the Caribbean when Europeans arrived and were the subject of genocides. Now, she can talk all she wants about indigenous people, because if you notice that the Maroons in Jamaica, for example, her friend, Dr. Andrew Holness, is treating them like nobody, right? Dr. Andrew Holness in Jamaica is treating the Maroons, the ones who stood up against the British and won them. He is actually, walking on them. So what is Miss Mottley talking about? About indigenous people. They are not about protecting our freedoms, are they? No. Now, Trevor's saying she even told Barbados that she has no interest in locking people up for crimes, that she wants money. So now the government is invested in crime even more once you can pay. Absolutely. Right? So she's no Michael Manley. She's absolutely no Michael Manley, because she would be trying now to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. She would be having that conversation in Barbados. She would be talking up against the IMF. Right? But she's on the board of the IMF, and she supports the strictures of the IMF. In fact, she is suggesting that without the IMF rigors and strictures, Barbadian economy would not have been growing. That is what she's saying, right? So how can she be a symbol of liberty, a champion of anti-colonialism, if these institutions represent colonialism? IMF, the climate justice agenda, all of these things are representative of the colonial institutions. Now, these saying, yes, in a way, slaves were given deplorable living conditions, and colonialism conditioned them to make do with a shack or hut in a region of hurricanes. Hurricanes are becoming more intense. And tomorrow or Tuesday, we'll be looking at, Dr. Andrew Holness' agreement with Guyana, and they're going to build houses. There are lots of things happening in the Caribbean, and we need to be aware of what is happening and just not look at what they're doing, but what it means, what it's actually implying. Right, agree with you absolutely on Mottley, yes, because she's what she is. Z saying, but the opportunity for all descendants of slaves have better homes to withstand increasing natural threats are just not there. My problem with the whole, what do you call it now, just the reparatory, the reparations. My question is, if Europeans, right, are suffering, if white Americans are suffering, and the state is not helping them, do you think they're going to help us? Do you really think that if you go to England right now and the suffering in England that people are going through, right? Do you think their government, who is turning their backs against their own people, their own citizens, do you think that they are going to turn and say, I'm going to help the people in the Caribbean? Okay, I think that we are sometimes, what world are we living in? When we look at Haiti and we saw what happened after the earthquake, 2010, and all the billions of dollars that went there to rebuild that country, where is the money? Never went there in the first place, right? And the measly sum that went there, was shared up among the NGOs and their workers. That is what we have to understand. And many of us are still not growing up. We're still suggesting, where's the money? Dr. Andrew Holness, you got billions of dollars. Where is it coming from? Where is it? Give us the money, right? There is no money. There is no money. At the point, Trevor is saying, at the point Barbados is at with all the borrowing and debt, there is nothing one can do to turn Barbados around without sacrifice. Sacrifice which they have already indoctrinated most people to defend. because she's so eloquent again, right? She's not a Michael Manley in terms of her command of the language. I think he had a better command of the language than she does. But she knows she has been given a narrative. Miss Mia Mottley has been given a narrative, and she's quite eloquent in defending the narratives given to her by the WEF, by the UN, and by the IMF. She's great. She has studied their narratives, and she has mastered the delivery of the narratives, right? But in terms of being able to look at complex problems and giving solutions or helping you to understand what is happening, she's not able to do, right? She's not able to do. Our politicians are not as well studied as the likes of Michael Manley. They were more well read, maybe because they had less distractions too. Michael Manley, he was born in 1924, so he had less distraction. He didn't have internet and all those stuff, so they read, right? So these men were readers. And back in the days when Michael Manley was in London, you had a lot of intellectuals there, Caribbean intellectuals, like the likes of, what's his name, C.L.R. James, and these people there. So I'm sure they were there, and they had stimulating conversations and discussions, and they read voraciously, right? So right now what we have are dull politicians, if you will, right? Our education system has dumbed us down. And not only them, we are also dull, right? We are also likewise not as widely read of people of yesteryear. So we're having problem with explaining things as they ought to be explained. And people are looking for gossips and, something to keep their hearts satisfied, if you will. Trevor saying exactly so. The board of the IMF, she is a creature of the system. She is. She cannot and will not free you from it, only enslave you. And she's saying, she praises them. And I'm saying, how can she be an anti-neoliberalist if she is so attached to the IMF? I don't know. Now, the life of Dell is saying, rather than going to the IMF, which is part of the West colonial system, what about if the West Indies was to join the BRICS? Let me ask, that's a very good question. What if we were to join the BRICS? One of the things I think Marcus Garvey was trying to do was to let us know that no matter whether it's white people or Latin Americans, do you know that we're most hated in Latin America, by the way? Do you know that Black people, right? We like to talk about the white people, even though we have a lot of whites in Latin America too. But if you understand Latin America, go to Brazil. Go to Brazil, where you have the most people of African descent who live, but it has a very strong anti-Black sentiment, right? Now, BRICS, Brazil is there, right? Then we have Russia. You have South Africa. Is South Africa pro-Black? So sometimes when people talk about the BRICS, I really wonder too if we're thinking that these people are not going to like us and treat us well. And that's why Marcus Garvey was saying we've got to be self-reliant, because we are the most hated. We are the most despised people on the earth. So that is what Marcus Garvey was trying to do. We still have not gotten that his message. And as a result of that, we are relying on Russia or China or America, and they're going to kick us as they normally will do, because we are despised, right? And I'm not suggesting here that they might not help one or two people, right? But helping one or two people individually is not going to save us as a collective, right? As a collective. And that is what we want to do, but we have never sought to do. So I don't think BRICS is going to change our problem. I think we are the ones who have to come, and we are bright enough. If we settle down and we become united, the Caribbean region is bright enough, right? We are bright enough to come together, to wield our minds and our hearts together, and we can come up with some solutions to some of our problems. But we people like to behave well. I think what has happened really is that we like individual. We have become now this individualism. That's the word I'm looking for. We have become individualist, so we just care about ourselves and our success on the world stage. So Miss Mia Mottley is not thinking about the Barbadian as a collective. She's thinking about herself and fostering and building her career. It's not about building Barbados for Barbadians. And that is what is happening to us on the stage. But I don't think, and this is my opinion, you could disagree, that BRICS is going to help the Caribbean as a whole. They're not. History is there. We're despised, right? And Brazil doesn't love us better than America. In fact, I think that, you'd probably get a little bit more out of America than you get out of Brazil as a black person. You would get more out of America, out of racist America and racist Europe than you are going to get out of a Brazil, right? And that's the irony of it all, right? And then we have Z saying, but the opportunity for all Caribbean people to improve their living standards from poor housing coupled with the colonial conditioning have not materialized, and climate change is worsening threats. Now, that is what they're telling us, that the climate is worse. But the fact is, if we don't improve our economic lot, how are we going to work against climate change? Let us say, for example, for all intents and purposes, you have hurricanes coming. You have no money, you have no job, you have no way of supporting yourself. The storm comes and then it demolishes your home. How are you going to build? In most cases, in most times, the governments don't help. As we're seeing right now, they're telling us that they sent billions of dollars to these countries and houses still have not been built. So do we rely on government for central planning, or should we have another system where government gives us the economy, right, a good economy, that we can be able to be productive, so that if anything happens to us, then we can take care of ourselves, or maybe our families can help, or anybody, but not the government. The government is not going to help us, right? And that's what the point. The government is not going to help us during a climate crisis. The government is not going to help the citizens during a climate crisis. And that is what we have to understand. We see it in Jamaica after Melissa. We've seen it in Haiti, in other countries. What is there what is there to convince us, I should say, that the government is going to help us? It's not going to help us, right? So that's why we want a healthy economy, so that we can help ourselves, if that should happen, unfortunately. Well, God forbid. Trevor says that the push for immigrants in the EU, etc., further helps to collapse the system financially and socially, and I think it is deliberate. This will bring the biggest power shift to lock in sellout politicians for the long haul. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, they're very, very good in terms of presenting things to us in a very palatable way. And it sounds good. Don't get me wrong. It sounds like the climate change agenda is good, and we should talk about climate justice, and we should have equality and all of that stuff. Great sounding words. But when we look at what they're doing, how can we believe them? How can we believe them? Please like and share the live. The algorithm is not pushing it out as it should. It could push out to more people, but it refuses to do that. So please share the live with other people. Now, Trevor says, correct, Andrew, the racism and colorism strikes again, but our people are always looking for a savior. Yes, and that is why they are worshiping Miss Mia Mottley and other politicians. Z saying, that's a good one, Andrew. That's the wake-up call. If they're not helping their own, they won't do it for us, right? That is what? Finger red, number one. Absolutely. They're not going to do it for us. They're not going to do it for us. If they're not doing it for their own people, they will never, but they have to use us as what? Guinea pigs. And they say, oh, those black people, we need to give them some money. Oh, because we, and then they what? Trick us. And they use the money for another purpose. They're only using us, including the LGBTQ. Do you think they love the LGBTQ community? They don't. But they're using also them as a way of enacting, right, laws that are going to be authoritarian, right? But they don't like any of us. We are their enemies. The elites don't care about us, right? And that's what we have to understand. Now, Trevor is saying what you just said about us bring bright enough and intelligent enough is used against us, telling us how literate we are, so ego and selfishness puts us against each other, even if we all burn. Well, I think we do, though, when you go to, and I'm sure you're, perhaps, I don't know where you are, Trevor, whether in the US or Canada, but when you go to these countries, you see a lot of brilliant Caribbean people. And even in the Caribbean itself, a lot of brilliant Caribbean people, right? Why is it that we can't pool our resources together? right, to be able. Look at Anthony Bogues from Jamaica, who's at Brown University, and there are lots of other great minds at these Ivy League colleges and universities, right? If we pool our intellectual resources together, I think that we should be able to come up with something. The problem is that, as I'm suggesting, is that once you get the Anthony Bogues at, from Jamaica at Brown University and the Patterson at Harvard University, when they get there, all they care about is their career, right? The elevation of their career. They're not going to challenge the system. Do you think Anthony Bogues is going to challenge Brown University and all of that and the system that he's a part of, and he's benefiting from the system? He's not going to do it. And let me say something. And the only person who has been very honest with us is Professor Hinz, who is from Guyana and who is a professor in the United States. He is the only person who is honest with us on this platform to date. He's saying all of us, to some extent, benefit from the system. So even though we talk against the system, how are we benefiting from the system, right? Just like how Black people benefited, some of us benefited from slavery. So we have to also speak openly. Some of us are benefiting from this system of inequity. Michael Manley, he was courageous enough to say that he benefited, and his class. And that's why he stood up against them. Do you know that when Michael Manley lost the election in 1980, that the class that he grew up with, they alienated themselves from him. They didn't want to talk to him, right? And that's why he went back to accepting the American philosophy of development, the free market system of development, because his entire class had alienated themselves from him. That is what happens when you stand up for what is right. People are not going to be flocking you, no matter how bright you are. Okay? People don't want to be around people who speak truth and who stand up and who will have these uncomfortable conversations that we're having on this platform. Okay? They don't want to hear it. It's too uncomfortable. Now, the Life of Dal is saying, joining the BRICS will send a message to the West, but at least we are trying to diversify. Trying is better than standing still. Yeah, and that is true. However, we also have to look at history too while we are trying, because we don't want to now put our monies and our lives into other people's things, and then we think we're going to be saved. We should know now. History should have taught us enough lesson that Black people are despised, that the system is willing to help one or two Black people, and then they use us as symbols of success and say that the system works, right? And that's exactly what BRICS would do. It's not going to do anything different. When you look at the countries that that are part of BRICS, they are not particularly fond of Black people. So I don't know what this fascination is, this obsession with BRICS is about. I really don't understand. And you probably have to help me to understand, because I just see this thing about, and that is going to be different from America. Oh, is it? Is it? Look at Brazil. Look at South Africa. Okay? And look at how they treat their own Black people. Right? A person like my color would never see, getting any high jobs. Well, a few of them do, token jobs in Brazil, right? If you're really brilliant and, they will have some token colorism there. But for the most part, when you go and you look at the top of Brazil, it is white. It is lily white. Okay? So we have to grow up. And there are lots of dark-skinned people in Brazil, darker than I am. Okay? Chris is saying, although Professor Cornel West's politics are kind of weak, he lost one of his professor jobs because of his pro-Palestinian right position before the 2023 Palestine. Absolutely. Absolutely. That is to tell us that even a professor, the likes of Professor Cornel West, who is a very outstanding professor of many years, that they know that's a part of the system, and even just to move away a little away from them, several inches away from them, they will castigate you, right? They'll castigate you, okay? And, Do you hear from him anymore? I mean, I don't see him a lot now. Cornel West, is he popular as he used to be? Trevor is saying, you just hit the nail on the head. And that's exactly why I'm so adamant about looking at the education system and our identity. The biggest problem we have is classism because we have an identity crisis. It is true. It is true. It is true. If slavery is called by its name tomorrow, the same very people we look at as educated and those alongside us will encourage it because it's legal according to the system, so it's right for them or to them. You are so right. You are so right. And that is why and that is why too our vision is impaired, because we can't see the difference now between BRICS and the US Western system. And to me, South Africa is a part of the Western system, right? Because it is racist. It's a racist country, right? We know the history of South Africa. Brazil is a part of the Western system, right? So would we think they're going to do something different than what America is doing? I don't think so. For the Caribbean, I don't think so. How much do they even know about us, right? Do you know many people don't know anything about us? Many people in the world don't hardly ever know anything about the Caribbean. You know, a few sports guy here, Usain Bolt and some musicians. Okay? But apart from that, they don't care. They don't know and they don't care. They don't know and they don't care. So what we have to do is that because we care about ourselves and we know ourselves, we have to develop our own institutions or something that is more self-reliant. That was what Marcus Garvey was saying, and he was correct. And nobody has been able to this day to challenge him on what he said, because he was 100% right. Right? Was he flawed too? Yes, he was flawed. He wasn't a perfect man, but that ideology was the ideology to have, was the vision to have. Trevor is saying people see BRICS as hope and a savior, lighter than themselves with money where they can sell themselves to. We always want to depend on a stranger, always wanting to be accepted by their oppressors, and for a free would walk to hell bare feet. Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think that we need to, move from one people who oppressor to another oppressor. I don't think so. Remember during slavery too, if we remember slavery, guys, that some people who were enslaved under British people or enslaved under the Spaniards, sometimes they said the Spanish people were not as evil and wicked as the British and the French, right? Because they would give their slaves some sort of, time to relax and to have fun, right? While the French and the British were really, exact, and they, extract a lot of, of your energy. They exert you. They worked you to death, right? To death. Now, it doesn't mean, therefore, because the French and the Spanish and the other people were nicer than the British and the French, it doesn't mean, therefore, that they were not slave masters. They were all slave masters, and we should not want to exchange one for the other. Okay, and that's what we're trying to say here with the BRICS and the Western economic base system of governance. BRICS, in part, was designed to circumvent BRICS. The thing about BRICS is that it is not really even a strong alliance. There is no military force backing it. That is a very crucial point. And I did ask Mr. Fred Corbyn, when he came here on several occasions, that where is the military? If the United States should threaten BRICS tomorrow, it will have to end, because the United States has the military power to crush it. So, and it doesn't have also, where is it also its currency? Does it have a currency? BRICS, does it have a currency? I don't know. I mean, a real currency, not something that is now, that they've made up and showed you and whatever, but something that is actually functioning, right? We can't live now in a romanticized world. We have to live in the real world. Chris is saying, sorry, BRICS was in part designed to circumvent Western economic domination. My thing is, I think it was made to trick us, to deceive us. That's my thing, that there was a savior. They always present something to us as a savior, right? So we don't revolt. right? We will revolt against the entire system because the entire system is corrupt. From Brazil to South Africa to China to the United States, the entire system is corrupt and needs to be overhauled. Right? The system is corrupt. So I think BRICS they always try to give us some illusion so to contain us and think that there's some hope. Yeah, you don't get with the West, go with the BRICS. Oh, you don't get with the BRICS, go with, go with China, whatever, right? And then many of us are deceived because we're not thinking. Tragic when we are told to find dignity in everything demoralizing. That's exactly so. We must find it in the system, and the system is never better. Always reminds me of Mavado when he said that it don't make money, it don't make sense. Yeah. And we also have to, I like what you said too, because we also have to follow the money. Who is the owner of BRICS? And, we have to do our research and see who is behind the startup of this thing. And you do your research on that person to see if that person is even linked with the Western system of economics. And if you do research, you will see that a lot of time they are. Money is interrelated, right? If you do proper research, you will see that oftentimes money is interconnected. We are living in a globalized world where you have global capital, a system of global capital. So I don't think that BRICS is any alternative at all. But they present it as such. But again, you have to do your own research to convince or to leave the system alone. I don't think it's going to help us. I doubt it. Hopefully it will. Now, this Brian Meeks here is saying about Michael Manley. Brian Meeks was also as a professor, I think, at the University of the West Indies. My lasting memory of Michael Manley is a sepia-toned image taken from late October of 1980 at a mass meeting in Spanish Town, site of the old capital of Jamaica. The long 1980 election was drawing to its bloody finale over the bodies of some 800 Jamaicans. For those of you who don't know, the 1980 election in the 1980 general election in Jamaica was very violent and vicious. 800 Jamaicans died as a result of the violence. Manley's governing People's National Party had been crippled by a collapsing economy, which had suffered debilitating loss of capital over the previous 7 years, and by widespread violence, which had reached epidemic proportions. For more than 2 years, these harsh realities, driven home to the people in graphic detail by the premier and right-wing newspaper, The Daily Gleaner, had contributed to the unpopularity of his government and the growing prestige of Edward Seaga's pro-American Jamaica Labour Party. But on the moonless night, the party faithful had gathered in Spanish Town Square to sing together, to stand firm with their leader, Joshua, who is known as Michael Manley, and to tell the labor rights imperialists and CIA that they knew where they were going. Tonight, however, was not going to be like hundreds of other meetings that had been taking place across the length and breadth of the small island. As Michael Manley rose to address the adoring throng, suddenly there was the unmistakable heavy industrial rattle of submachine gunfire. So he was being shot at even though he lost the election. It seems to me that they were still trying to kill Michael Manley, even though he lost the election. He had lost the election to Edward Seaga. It was pandemonium. People were running, shoes were everywhere. Local and national party leaders who had been sitting on the raised platform were flat on their bellies, except Michael Manley. So Michael Manley stood. He stood up and continued his speech, even though people were moving. Right? 3 members of his personal security detachment were struggling, pleading to pull him to the floor, but he, with his full 6 feet plus stature, refused to bow. So Michael Manley was one of those leaders who was courageous, and even though his life was in danger, right? His life was in danger, he was willing to die for a cause. How many of our prime ministers would be able to do that, or would want to do that in the first place? Now, this complex twist in the typical middle-class trajectory served both to somewhat marginalize Manley from the mainstream of his peers and to instill in him that sense of compassion and call to service which lasted through his life. He was thus from the middle class, so he came from the middle class, but not of it. I repeat that. He was thus from the middle class, but not of it. And as Michael, the student at Jamaica College and then the London School of Economics, evolved into Manley, the militant trade unionist, and finally Joshua, the comrade leader, he was for the people, but never quite of the people. Can you explain that? What do you think he meant when he says he was for the people, but was not of the people? What do you think he meant by that? He was for the people, but not of the people. Yes, Andrew Bricks is just another, Trevor is saying, another alternative to what the system is about to do. So we'll walk freely onto the new plantation while talking about burning the current one, the irony. Absolutely. It's just to give you some, something to chew on, right? But at the end of the day, they are on board with what is happening. Z saying, imagine though the trauma Caribbean children are confronted with when they realize their race is despised and has always been despised. And yes, but I wonder if they don't face more trauma, ZE, when our leaders are bowing to a system that hates us, right? That is now the trauma that we're facing, at least during the days of authors and the Eric Williams and all of these other great leaders of the Caribbean, Maurice Bishops. I think in that time, people could see that our leaders were fighting against the system, right? And they were genuinely fighting against it, struggling against injustices. So, I mean, I think we, our generation and the one afterwards, are more traumatized because they realize that our politicians are on board. Mia Mottley is on board. Andrew Holness, Dr. Irfan Ali are on board with the system. That, to me, is more traumatic. But if our leaders were to have stood up, right, as brave and courageous men and women, I think that our people would be less traumatized because they can see that we have in our people, we have the ability to resist. We have the ability to resist. And I'm going to say something too. Somebody said when I started the program that, the Fabian socialism is racist and is not a good ideology, right? And, I respect that. But let me just say something here. Notice that China, we can say all we want to say against China, but China was able to use a racist ideology, right, to benefit their own people. I repeat that. China was able and is still able to use racist systems of oppression, and they apply to their system in the benefit of their own people. Why are Caribbean people not doing that? Why are we unable? Why are we just, okay, this system is racist and you just, ignore it? But the Chinese are saying, well, it might be racist, but I'm going to adopt the good elements of the system, and I am going to enrich my people. And that's exactly what they did. Chris is saying it's true. Living in Canada, even though we have Caribbean people here and people vacation in the Caribbean is not well known aside from dancehall, reggae, and soca. A lot of times when they talk about, the Caribbean is under Latin America. And when they talk about Latin America, they often do not call the Caribbean. We are not respected, right? We think we are so big and bold and we have accomplished much, but we're tiny. Right, we're tiny, and that is why the leaders of yesteryear, like Michael Manley, the Eric Williams, and the Burnhams of Guyana, they were calling for federalization, right, to federalize the Caribbean, for us to have the West Indian Federation, because they knew that, without us being unified, we would not be strong, right? Because many people don't know about us, right? And do you know that there are Americans today who think that, oh, you have these islands and Jamaica might be the capital, and they think we're all a part of this in the same region. We're just some islands, some scattered islands in wherever, right? They don't care, right? They don't care. And the same thing, if they don't care, If the other man and woman doesn't care, what do you think about the leaders of the IMF and these millionaires in America and Canada? Do you think they care about us? No, they don't. When they go to tell them that, oh, what is going to happen if I have to pay you all this money, I can't build a hospital, I can't build a school, I can't take care of my people, they tell them that they don't care. They don't care. In fact, there was a situation that happened in between the guy there of Tanzania in the 1970s, because they were talking about I want to read you this from from what this guy was saying about Michael Manley. As a result, decolonization remained one of Manley's core aims into the 1970s. But you couldn't pursue decolonization without raising fundamental questions about equality, justice, and the structure of the national economy. In his first book, The Politics of Change, Manley elaborates ideas on changing the actual colonial structure of Jamaican society. So you cannot talk about improving lives if you don't talk about decolonization, which our politicians are not going to do, because they're not going to change the structure. They don't want to change the structure. If they should talk about the structure, then it's going to what? Create problems. Now, that involved overturning colonial laws like the master-servant law, putting forward public programs like free education and bring ordinary Black people to the center of Jamaican society, or to the society of all our Caribbean countries. In his political practice, he attempted to dismantle the legacies of the old colonial order, right? And that is what they don't want to do. Why do they want the order to be intact? Why do you think these people want the order to remain intact? Because that is how they make their money, right? The order as it is in place enriches the West, enriches the Western oligarchs. It is and will never change until we demand a change. Slavery would never have ended until the slaves said, we want a change, and fought for the change. But I think that what is happening to us now in the modern era is that we have become so accustomed to slavery. We love slavery. We love the sort of world in which we live. We are comfortable. And that is why they're treating us the way in which they're treating us. And not to mention about the technology, which has made us even more stupid. Right? Trevor is saying these new politicians are house Negroes who aspired to be so or were born as so. Who will they fight for? The politicians today are desperate people detached from the people. So how can they love them? Well, they love them because they are celebrities. And whether celebrities are good or they're nice, people just love them because they look good, right? And they are symbols of power, authority, whatever you will, right? You know, I was reading an article to you on Friday, and the writer says that people celebrate people that the majority celebrate. So if the majority are celebrating, you know, what's her name? Mia Mottley, the entire world is celebrating Mia Mottley. The Global South is celebrating Miss Mia Mottley, so everybody's going to celebrate her. If you had 300 people on this live, people are going to cling to it because they say something is happening, so I have to watch him, even if I'm talking nonsense, right? However, when you see 30 people on the live, they're gone, right? Because, oh, nothing is going on here. That's how people think. People don't think because they can think independently. They think because they look at what other people are doing, and if lots of other people are actually celebrating Miss Mia Mottley, then I should, because she is famous, you know, so I'll go that direction. The pandemic told us that too. The majority of people took the V, right? So the fact of the matter, I need to take it too, because the majority of my friends and family members took it, right? That is how we think, unfortunately, you know, and that is why our politicians are so popular. And even though they are enslaving the populace, that the vaccine did not help the people, people will still vote for them. Trevor is saying, and the people see them as top celebrities, absolutely, with lullaby rhetoric, which makes them sleep better. If Manley or another, and anyone popped up, now people would revolt against that person. Absolutely, they would. And I'm happy he's saying that. If Michael Manley were to go back to Jamaica, he would not be accepted. Why? Because they would think that he's a disruptor. He's disrupting the system, right? And then it's causing the angst of the United States and all of that stuff. So he would have to, that's why he capitulated in 1989. When he went back to power in 1989, he capitulated. He realized that the people he can't. Because people are going to blame him for disrupting the society and for causing migration and the angst of a global power, the likes of the United States. And most of us would not support him. We wouldn't support him because we stand up for anybody like Andrew Holness, who is popular and who the media love, right? And America loves because he's doing their bidding. So he's popular. He's 1 p.m. Andrew Holness is 1 p.m. because Andrew Holness is an obedient boy. Okay? Fabian Socialism, Chris is saying, is not Marxist-Leninism. Absolutely. Marxism-Leninism is what the Chinese base their system on. Not in the rabbit sense, because they're also, politically, yes, but economically, that's not true. Fabian Socialism, I think, was a form of socialism created by the UK elites. Yes, which I did on the first. Yeah, I explained that, Chris, borrowing from Marx ideas. Yeah, we did say that. The Marxist-Leninists believe in revolution, right? So you would just go and revolt and you would just totally demolish the system, like what happened in Cuba. Michael Manley believed in more democratic socialism in which they could debate, right? You'd still have the democratic institutions in place, right? But you would have a socialism because you would try to make the system more equitable, right? Because what we're seeing in the Caribbean is an unequal system, right? That is what we're seeing. And thanks for explaining that, because I did so early on, but people still need to be reminded, right? People still need to be reminded. I guess if you ask many people of the Caribbean, what is the difference between Marxist-Leninism and Fabian Socialism, they could not tell you. But they're gone. As soon as you talk about these things, they're gone. I don't want to hear that, because you don't want to be educated. And that's the whole point. In the Caribbean, we reject education at the level that we should be having it. We reject education at the level in which we should be having it. Now, look at Barbados, this last election, Trevor is saying, and campaign for a true simulation. Ralph said he wants morality and spoke about identity and character. Mia spoke about promising money, gave huge parties and picnics. Absolutely. And the people believe them, right? Well, Ralph didn't win. She won. Ralph from St. Vincent and the Grenadines did not win the election, but Miss Mia Mottley won hers. But he was too old to, why doesn't Ralph, retire? Trevor, people would have killed Ralph. Which Ralph are you talking about? Are you talking about Ralph Gonzalez? What's his name again? The one from St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Trevor says, yes, but the internet and the algorithm is social engineering. Absolutely. And that's where people get tricked thinking it's popular, so it's good. Right. And but it's anything right now, Trevor. So if it is, if it is a program, if it is a sport, if it is a food item, a drink, anything that you see the majority of people drinking or eating has to be good. So even if you're passing a KFC, right, and you're saying, wow, a lot of people there, people just flock it because a lot of people are there, it means that the food is good, right? But if they see 2 people there, they might not go because they're thinking that, oh, nobody's there, they might not enjoy the food. People are just easily influenced. For some reason, I just don't know. But that is how we are as a people. Trevor is saying same old tricks over and over again. Absolutely. And people still fall for them, right? Are we that stupid? Fazi McCarvers is saying groupthink is going to kill the majority of our people. And you're right. It's a groupthink. And it's just the way how things go. And it will never change. I've always asked myself the question, when you go to a mall, right? There are times when you go there and you see just a few people. And then another time you go there and loads of people at the mall. And you're asking, did they all call each other and say, oh, there are lots of people here, come. And the more you see people is the more you see other people flocking. And you're wondering, where did these people come from? Who told them that the malls going to be filled today? It's weird. It's weird, but I can tell you, if 300 people were on this live right now, you'd see 300 more trying to flock to come to the live to see what's going on. But you see 30 people, I'm out, right? Because that is how you think. Now, Trevor is saying correct groupthink, aka hive mind, and the connection that they promise us via the internet once they control the algorithm through the matrix. And they do control the algorithm. They do control the algorithm, and people think lots of views signify that the video ought to be watched, the content is good, and that is not so, right? That is not so. Now, Trevor says, one thing the Chinese have perfected is placing all these things attached to the identity of being Chinese. Absolutely. And nationalism. And that's what I was saying. And it works. And it works. And that's why somebody was asking me, Trevor, what can we do? I'm saying that we can do something too, not because the system is racist or the system might have flaws. There are some things that we can adjust and then adopt, right? And then try to make it applicable to our people. Allow it to be applicable to our people, but our education system is rotten to the core. Our leaders can't do it because they're brainwashed. They just got good grades on exam, got a title, and people respect them and think that they're great and that they're intellectuals when they're not. They're not. And the difference between Manley is that he was able to read, and he read voraciously, but he was able to explain in layman terms difficult concepts that he read, and he was trying the best he could to implement them to improve the lives of ordinary Jamaicans. That's what he was doing. And the man was brilliant. When you listen to his interviews, you're, my God, this man can talk, right? And I'm talking about just not to talk, but talk about complex matters, very difficult to explain. So we have Trevor saying, and China is the blueprint for the New World Order. It is. It is. China is the blueprint for the New World Order. And my take on the matter, Trevor, is that they are pumping her up as the example for where we need to be. And that's why many people are suggesting that China is this and China is that, and they would prefer to have Chinese than to be under America. But you are going to understand that in the final analysis, China is going to impose slavery on everybody just as the West does, right? You have to understand that. Now, Z saying, I have heard Manley's ideological rigidity was a problem and tarnished his image, Andrew. Is this an accurate view in your opinion? I don't think that he was rigid. As we're saying that he was milder. His was more of a reform, right? His wasn't a transformation. If you listen to Marxists, they want a complete transformation where they want the entire system to go down. Michael Manley was saying, no, the system is okay as it is, but it needs to be more equalized. We need to have more equity in the system. So we need to have, we have good schools, but we need to democratize education and, expand education to all segments of our society. So he was not necessarily saying the society should be uprooted, right? And for everything to be destroyed, as many Marxist Leninists would do. So I don't think he was rigid. I think that he was milder. He was center left. He was not a radical. Michael Manley was not a radical. He was more of a reformist, right? Maybe you would call now the guy there in Cuba, Fidel Castro. You would liken Fidel Castro to more of a radical Marxist Leninist, right? But not Michael Manley. And Michael Manley declared that he was not. In fact, as we're suggesting, I think somebody was telling me, I don't know how true it is, he's from Tanzania. And I was talking to him one day, and he said he met Michael Manley. And Michael Manley did a lecture at his university, the University of Tanzania. And I said, oh, what was the conversation about? He said that he met him and spoke with him. But at the lecture, Michael Manley was asked, why was Walter Rodney, the famous Guyanese intellectual, why did they send him away from Jamaica? Why did they not accept him when he went back to his position at the University of the West Indies? And Michael Manley said to him, because he wasn't behaving himself. Right? Michael Manley told the lecturer told the audience in Tanzania, that what's his name, from Guyana, that Walter Rodney was not behaving himself, and that's why they had to send him away. So it means, therefore, that Michael Manley was no Walter Rodney, who was more of a radical and wanted to see a transformation of the system. Not that the two were not good. I'm just suggesting to you that Michael Manley he was not a radical, right? He wasn't a radical at all. And that's the difference between the Fabianist, as we were saying, and the Marxist-Leninist, right? That the Fabianists, they believe in reforms to the system, gradual reforms, not that you're going to have an overnight revolution that upends the system. They don't believe in that, right? So, in other words, whatever Michael Manley was doing in his time, those are the things that Jamaica needed if it was going to be able to progress as a society. What happened, the society, it was too much for the people. They didn't want it. It was shocking to them, and they decided that they were going to leave. The society has been made poorer for that because we needed it. But maybe he was too excited. He was too passionate. I am too, like yourself. When you're very passionate about something and you want to see change in society, you will push the string. And I'm like that. Get it done now. It must be done. So probably too, he was a little impatient with the changes that he saw. Maybe he was looking at Trinidad, for example. Trinidad at the time would have been way ahead of Jamaica in terms of its education, in terms of educating the masses of its people. So Michael Manley in the 1970s now probably was pushing Jamaica toward that sort of goal, having an educated mass, the masses educated, the economic system sort of, better for the people, right? And the elites there didn't want that to happen. And they then, summoned the efforts of the United States to help them to get Michael Manley out of office, right? So it is how our elites, because Jamaicans think that it's a united country, but Jamaica is not a unified country. We must understand that, right? And that's why that country is not growing. And people are asking, how is it so popular, right? It's so popular, and they have created some good educated people and some musicians and all, and sports, whatever. But Jamaica will always be Jamaica. It will remain stagnant. It will remain stagnant because we don't want to deal with these very harsh truths. Now, Trevor is saying, yes, exotic food, for example, not good for you, but it was marketed to you, so you eat it with seasonings and stay yummy. Absolutely. And and if the Chinese did that, and grew their economy, good for them. Trevor is saying all the visionaries are not in positions of power. We have to look at one another with value, as I do see us here today, yes, similar to Manley. Greetings, Pedro. Nice to join the live. You've been late, but you're here, right? And we missed your input into the conversations. You always give some insightful comments. Yes, so we have, welcome everybody, and to the live. Some of you are late, and I wonder where were you having your Sunday dinner? Then Z saying, has the inequalities of the society reached such a level that the Marxist revolution approach would be more effective than the Fabian Socialist approach? That's a good question. Do you think that we can reform the society now? Do you think that things have gotten so bad that the entire system has to go like slavery? Remember now that people wanted to reform slavery and to keep it intact. That is what the guy there in America wanted to do, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln only wanted some reforms to slavery. He was not oppositional to slavery. He did not oppose slavery. He just thought that it should not be expanded to certain states in the United States, right? But he just wanted some reforms, and had they just agreed to the reform, he would have kept slavery in place. So I am asking the question, do you think the entire system needs to be uprooted, or do you think that the Fabian Socialists, as Z is also asking, it's too late now. We can't do any reform. It has to go. I think the system has to go. I don't see the system, just like slavery, I don't think it can be reformed. It is too late. It is too interconnected and intertwined, right? And where you least expect corruption, it is there because they're so connected. The global elites are so connected that it's difficult to separate them and to divide them. I think we've reached thus far. Another thing is that many of our people are brainwashed. They don't want to listen to conversations like these. They want to just hear, superficial understanding, explanation of where we are, and, do fear and doom and gossips. And that is what gives people here momentum in the Caribbean, not the brightest of people in some cases. Now, then we have Trevor saying a lot talking about Manley, who he was, etc., comparison to politicians today, Mottley and Fabian Socialism. Exactly. Well summarized. Thank you so much, Trevor. And then we have Pedro saying, have a look at, what is it? Frondel Stewart's talk at Princess Margaret this afternoon. Yeah, good. Yes. And so we're seeing this. We're seeing here a total decay because our politicians are now not the ones that we used to have of yesteryear. And we can see that Miss Mia Mottley, she is more of IMF, and she's praising the IMF, right, and what they've done. She's praising the agenda of climate change, which is not her agenda, right? And at least Michael Manley had an agenda that he was, that was uniquely his for Jamaica, his vision for Jamaica. Miss Mia Mottley's agenda is largely the agenda of the WEF, of the United Nations, right, and all the globalists of the New World Order, right? This is not her vision for Barbados. This is not her vision for the world. This is not her vision for the global South. But Michael Manley had a vision for the new economic order. He challenged also that we need to talk about the new economic order that Michael Manley was so much a part of. Now, this guy is saying that this year, the year that the interview was done, was the 50th anniversary of the declaration of the new economic order, right? A program led by countries in the global South for a restructuring of the rules of the international economic system to end economic colonialism and dependency. Manley was known as one of the most influential advocates of the NIEO, that's the new international economic order, that's the NIEO. Can you talk about Manley's role in the NIEO? And this is what he's saying, Anthony Borg is saying. Manley realized that even though countries like Jamaica had gained constitutional independence, they remained wedded to a world economy structured by colonialism, what people like Kwame Nkrumah would call neo-colonialism. Transforming the world economy depended on altering price-setting mechanisms, and developing technological and energy independence. We grow the commodities, but we don't set the prices, and we rely on importing machinery and oil to process them. Because he was deeply invested in political and economic democracy, Manley was also very concerned with the rise of multinational corporations. Now listen to what he's saying. These problems could only really be dealt with through what Julius Nyerere of Tanzania and others call the trade union of the poor. At the core of the NIEO, that's New International Economic Order, was a new economic world order. It was based on the idea, as elaborated in 1979 in Arusha, Tanzania, that there was the need to complete the liberation of third world countries from external domination. So we have not completed the phase of liberation of our third world countries or the global South. Third world countries, therefore, had to band together to gain a say in the structure and operations of the world economy. Julius Nyerere and Michael Manley were a tag team in the NIEO. Both grew up in former British colonies. One had studied at Edinburgh University and the other in London. And importantly, they shared the sense that a real threat to post-colonial societies was the rise of a domestic elite that would mimic the old colonial rulers. Nair developed the Arusha Declaration, which was really about cauterizing the power of the new elite and their capacity to corrupt the state. Michael didn't get that far. He was operating rather in a different political culture. But his ideas on socialism and decolonization were about constraining the power of the elite to leverage the state for their own purposes. So what are they doing? They're leveraging the state for their own political purposes. So what you see the 21 families doing in Jamaica, or how many families in Barbados, or how many families in Trinidad and Tobago or Guyana, they are leveraging the state for their political purposes, not for the masses. Not for the masses. And that is why when Michael Manley actually stood up and wanted change in the Jamaican society, they actually got in touch with the United States and told them that he was a disruptor of the program. Right? That Michael Manley was a disruptor of the program. A lot of times when I talk on this platform, when I listen to Jamaicans also, they tend to always blame the United States, but they have not also been told that Jamaican elites were anti-Michael Manley's program and policies. They have not been told that. They think it was just only the CIA. Right? Have you ever heard that your worst enemy is from within? A lot of times, your worst enemy is from within. And Michael Manley, some of his worst enemies were within. Even the very PNP party, right? We talk also about the GLP, but we also don't talk about, as you know, Beverly Anderson Manley said. She said that in the PNP, you had the center right, the center left, and the center she was suggesting. But the fact is, she said that when they were having a meeting, many of them who were part of the center right of the PNP would ask Michael Manley, are you going communist? So when we think about the GLP, we tend to like to simplify knowledge and say, oh, the GLP was not progressive and the PNP were. But there are people in the PNP who were, as she suggested, who would have been better off being in the GLP because their ideologies aligned more with that of the PNP, the GLP. But they were in the PNP. And they became some of Michael Manley's greatest foes and perhaps betrayers. Okay? And sometimes we don't talk about these things. Everything is just so simplistic and it's not properly grounded in intellectualism and intellectual thought, you know? Pedro Jamat is saying, Mia will go against anything the present president of the United States. She doesn't go against him. If she probably even think of going against him, she has to do that quietly because she knows that he can crush her, right? So that's why she's not talking. She's quiet on everything. What is she talking about? All she's talking about is climate change, right? There's nothing that Miss Mia Mottley is talking about. Is she talking about the current crop of Haitians who will be deported, and Syrians, by the way? I understand you have 6,000 Syrians and about 350,000 Haitians who will be deported from the United States because Trump ended their TPS, their Temporary Protected Status Program. Now, you tell me, do you hear Ms. Mia Mottley talking about these things? She is not, because she cannot challenge Trump, because she knows that if she does, she can be dethroned. She understands the system. Now, we're asking the question which the system is currently answering for us. It knows it needs to die, so it will have us give into its reform and spit out those of us unwilling to conform. You know, to be frank with you, I would have preferred a reform to like what Michael Manley was doing if the people were, you know, cooperative, right, and willing to have open dialogue. That is the best way. Because when you have these violent revolutions, they can wind up being, you know, you'll never go back to where you need to be, right? And could be the end of civilization, if you will, right? Look at Haiti. I mean, Haiti has never become what it should have been because of that bloody revolution. It was necessary because slavery had to go, but it just didn't last. It started out as if, you know, there was lots of hope for Haiti, but it never lasted. Now, Pedro Jamot is asking, how come Singapore, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Wales, Northern Ireland don't blame colonization, only the Negro nations? We were saying that, Pedro, that if you look at what Miss Mia Mottley says, and she doesn't always speak on truth, some of what she says are factual. She mentioned about the countries that borrow. And she was saying that those countries that borrow, I was trying to, give her exact words. She's suggesting that, many of these people, some of these countries, including the countries that you referenced, and among the developed nations, that they don't have to pay high interest rates as we do. They pay a high interest rate if they borrow of 3 to 4%, while you have those of us mostly in the global south, in the islands, we are paying like 14%. So what Michael Manley and these people are saying, the play field is not level. And that is why some are going to progress than others. The playing field. So even when you go to Barbados, I could come to Barbados, or you could go to Jamaica, and you would say, oh, that person from from that class is growing and they're progressing. Why can't everybody do it? Everybody can't do it because, everybody doesn't have this access to the same schools, access to the same money, access to the same opportunities, right? So the same thing with nation states. We sometimes, Singapore, and people talk a lot about it. Do you know that Singapore never accepted this free market sort of thing that we have accepted? They are still, the state regulates the market for them. Right? We in the Caribbean, on the other hand, Michael Manley wanted to do it. Now look at Singapore. Jamaica was ahead of Singapore in the 1960s, right? But when Michael Manley was trying to do the same thing that Singapore did in order for it to have been successful, the United States told him no. Right? Do you see the hypocrisy? Do you see the level of inequities? So every country is not treated in a similar manner. And some people think that, and we tend to compare ourselves with each other. The same thing in Barbados. Barbados is not going to be treated the same way Jamaica is treated on the economic stage. And during slavery, it wasn't treated the same way. Right? The slave masters, the colonial masters never treated Barbados the same way they treated Jamaica, and vice versa. Okay, and they're not going to treat Haiti, and the U.S. is not going to treat Haiti or Jamaica the same way it treats Haiti, right? So we have to look at these things, and you might look, oh, so why is Jamaica better than Haiti, or why is the DR better than Haiti? Because the United States decides to be kinder to the DR than to Haiti, right? It doesn't mean, therefore, that the people in the DR are superior or they're doing something better than what the Haitians in their country is doing. It's just because they're not allowed. Z saying, I'll be honest, Andrew, Fabian socialism can be stealthily manipulated by some of our politicians to retard a Marxist type revolution and to keep appeasing the neo imperialists. And you're right. And we did say to Z that, let me repeat it. In 1952, Michael Manley of Jamaica, asked by the United States and Great Britain, he purged 4 members of the PNP party. Why? Because they were radical. And that is what they wanted. They wanted a revolution. And the United States told them that this was the height of the Cold War. It was 1952. The United States told Jamaica that and Michael Manley, Norman Manley's father, that's Michael Manley's father, was asked by the US and Great Britain to purge them because they were too revolutionary. Right? And there were factions in Michael Manley's party too, the Trevor Monroes. Right now you have Professor Trevor Monroe, among others, the D.K. Dunkleys of Jamaica, who were very left-minded. Do you know that one of the reasons why Beverly Anderson Manley said that she left him too was that after he lost the election in 1980, Michael Manley was even softer. And she thought she was more of a radical and she wanted to go. Right? So the fact of the matter is that yes, you are right, Z, that the countries like the big powers like the United States and other countries will intervene if they see that there are factions within your party that are too radical, right? And that is what they did to Jamaica in the 1950s and beyond. And even today, they do it. Pedro DeMarco is saying, why do you think leaders chose to go for this thing called adult suffrage? Remember, Black people were in parliament. Yes, but being in parliament does not mean that you control. right? Being in parliament does not mean you're in control of the system. And that's what they're there. They're just there as house slaves, right? Being in the house when the light-skinned black people were in the house during slavery did not mean that they control the system. They didn't. Just meant they just were a higher above the plantation, the ones who were on the plantation, right? So you and I are on the plantation, but they're house slaves, and they're doing and pretending to be important when they are controlled. Right, so that's what we're saying, Pedro, that we're not sovereign. We're not sovereign, and we're still being diktats are still coming from these metropolitan states like the United States and Britain, France, and all these former colonial powers. They have not died, right? They have not died. They have given us the illusion of democracy, but it's still as a controlled system where we don't control our destiny. Pedro Jamati is saying there's a difference between going and being pushed. Going and being pushed. What do you mean by that? Going where? Pedro is saying, how level you want the playing field? How many grants these greedy leaders get? As we're saying, as Ms. Mia Mottley is saying, your prime minister is saying, if you are making a loan, right, and you are giving loan and those persons, the developed nations have to pay back, their interest rate is just 4%, right? If you have to pay back an interest, at 14%, that's several times more than they have to pay. So it means, therefore, that your economy is going to be left behind. You know what I'm saying? The same thing you can say of Black Americans and white Americans. Black Americans are generally left behind because white people started out way earlier than they did. And so there's going to be the economic gap, right? Breach of the economic class. And that is what Michael Manley was saying. He was saying that the people who have benefited from slavery and colonialism in Jamaica, they have been way ahead. They had moved light years ahead of ordinary Jamaicans. It didn't mean, therefore, the ordinary black man in Jamaica was inferior. It's just that he never got the same start or push as that white person, or the brown class, if you will. So we can understand that. If you and I are living in Barbados, and Barbados has the top schools, top high schools, if you have rich people who can give their students extra class lessons for the GSE, what do you call them, the CXC, whatever you call it, right? If they have that sort of money and they have the privilege, your parents are teachers, lawyers, whatever they are, you have a better start. I'm not suggesting that there might not be people who do that too, but it's more of the exception than the rule, right? So that's what I mean. The play field is not level. It will never be level 100%, but you need to have some amount of equity. So if you're going to give me the loan at 4%, then give the other person the loan at 4% too, if you want to have some comparison in terms of how the economy is growing, Pedro is saying, Andrew, stop talking of the control of the system. It's an illusion. It's trade-offs we should seek. But how do we seek the trade-offs when the trade-offs are also controlled? Right? Everything is rigged. How do we seek the trade-off when the entire system is rigged and not rigged in our behalf? It's rigged on behalf of the reigning elites. I named you the sovereign nations, US, UK, France, China, Russia, because I'm suggesting to you the way how they got unite. Okay, when the United States approached China, for example, and Chinese people are talking about Chinese, the Chinese people told them that they were not going to also participate in the neoliberal game. They were not going to do it. The state was going to still control what private industry is done in its country. So no private corporation can go to China and tell China how to run its show. They regulate the corporations. However, in Jamaica, the private companies, when Michael Manley said to the United States, we need to have some of that regulation, the US said no. I give you an example, Pedro. In 1973, I believe, if my date serves me correctly, Jamaica was only receiving $30 million, $34 million, I beg your pardon, from these private corporations that were investing in bauxite, tourism, and other things in Jamaica, right? Now, when Michael Manley imposed the tax levy on them, Do you know how much he got? Over $300 million in taxes owed to the state. So in that sense, Michael Manley government was like a Chinese government, where he was regulating private industries. What they mean by the free market private industry is that the private corporations can do whatever they want. They control the government doesn't control them. So if they tell the government that they have to get 10% or 90%, that is what they have to get. And that is what we're seeing happening in Guyana. That even though they have found all of these reserves of oil, the society is getting poorer. The society is not being enriched by the oil reserves that you have there in Guyana. So that's what I mean. So the playing field is not level, and it needs to change. And obviously, because it's already rigged, we can't really bite the hand that feeds us. Trevor saying, what you're speaking about happened in the Cold War and sectoring the world by the UN, which further placed the economic maturity further behind the main players. Absolutely. Absolutely. Please like the live and send the live out, share the live so we can have other people joining to benefit from this very intellectually charged conversation that we're having, which is very well needed in the region. Trevor is asking, hence, why people try to relocate or work abroad. Absolutely. So the same thing, what they do to, it is rigged in the sense that if you make these economies less progressive, you can send their most skilled to the United States and to Canada and to the United Kingdom, and they can benefit from the sort of skilled labor that you're sending to them. By the way, do you hear Andrew Holness suggesting now that it is going to be now vice versa, where the United States has to send their skilled labor, and perhaps Canada and the United Kingdom, their skilled labor to the Caribbean to work? So let's see what they're doing with that. And I want to have a conversation on that in our conversation on AI and what is happening to the Caribbean in another discussion. Trevor is saying, when gambling, the house always wins. Absolutely. When you and the person who look at the stock market, Gemma. Pedro Gemma, let's look at the stock market. The stock market, they give us this illusion that if you put your money in the stock market, you can earn all of these thousands of dollars. Do you know the stock market is controlled? And they know when they should take their money out, the elites. It is so rigged that they know when to take the money out so that they won't lose great portions of their wealth. Are they calling you to tell you? So when you're comparing me now and say, oh, well, I am so good because I was able to earn trillions or billions of the stock market. But because you didn't earn it by yourself, you were helped because the thing was rigged, and it was rigged in your interest, not in mine. Right? And this is what we're talking about. Now, the white supremacist ideals being spouted by intellectuals who benefit from the education sells it to keep its people down. Now, I'm not suggesting, Pedro, as you're saying, that there are lots of people with that, and we said that before, and I think you came on the live when I was saying that some of us like to think in terms of white and black. But what I'm suggesting to you also is that we cannot ignore the fact that, yes, to a great extent, white people did have a better start at the game than people of color. They did. When you think of the fact that after slavery ended, not only in Haiti, but in Jamaica, Barbados, all of these countries, that the Caribbean countries had to pay Great Britain reparation for ending slavery. Just like what Haiti did to France, we too had to pay for our freedom, for gaining our freedom. So if you're telling me that we had to pay all this money while they extracted all the wealth from our country, who is going to be wealthier? Pedro, who is going to be wealthier? Obviously, Great Britain is going to be wealthier. The same thing happened in France and the United States. Their country is going to be wealthier because they had a better start and it was based on free labor. When you look at Haiti and the Dominican Republic, all of these Haitians coming to the Dominican Republic are earning little and nothing, right? And some of them are not paid anything because if they complain, the ICE will be called on them, the immigration people will be called on them, and they will be deported back to Haiti, right? So if you're comparing the DR to Haiti, you also have to look at the fact that the DR is built on free labor, and they're growing exponentially, while Haiti is hemorrhaging economically, financially. So people will say, wow, when they go to the DR, wow, this country is like night and day to the to Haiti. Yeah, because it is built on free and to low Haitian labor, right? Pedro is saying it seems when these islands gain independence, which means getting money without being accountable to the crown for spending, things gone south. But it was not better under colonialism either. As we said that in Jamaica, literacy was standing at 80%. It was better in Barbados, but it was never better in Jamaica. In the context of Jamaica, it was 80% illiterate. So if colonialism had continued, it means therefore that Jamaicans would have been kept illiterate. So things would not have progressed. They would have regressed, or would have been stagnant, as it were. Now, the problems Jamaica faced with the IMF were global problems. There was a sophisticated analysis of these problems coming out of the journal Development Dialogue in a special issue edited by Tanzanians and Jamaicans. Within the PNP, you also had a huge debate about the IMF. The IMF was one of the core entities ensuring that Manley would lose the election. The structural adjustment programs were very harsh, and they explicitly called for the reversal of the reform program that he had initiated, which means free healthcare, free education up to university level, etc., 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 right? Minimum wage increase. This combined with oil prices, political destabilization, and rising violence all contributed to his defeat. Now listen to what this is saying. Let's think about the 1980s. There are three key figures in the world during this decade: Margaret Thatcher, Helmut Kohl, and Ronald Reagan. They were united in their intention to shut down every progressive movement domestically and internationally, whether it was the miners' strike, the NIEO, that's the New International Economic Order, or the anti-apartheid movement. These three individuals had an ideological view about what society should be. To quote Maggie Thatcher, and she says here, and I quote, "There is no society, there are only individuals." This is what Margaret Thatcher said. There is no society, there are only individuals. And that is what how we're leading society right now. We don't see it as a society, they see us as individuals. Stuart Hall called this moment a revolution in ideas and social practices. Now, after Manley's defeat in 1980, there was a meeting in Cancun in 1981, chaired by Ronald Reagan. Julius Nyerere attended to, he was the prime minister of Tanzania, attended to represent the NIEO arguments. When they got to that part of the agenda, Ronald Reagan said, "Next item." So he never wanted, Julius Nyerere to talk about what is happening to his society and how some of these colonial legacies still remained there. So when that was on the agenda, Ronald Reagan said, "Next item." He's totally ignored what the prime minister was actually putting on the table. That is what was reported back to Manley, and he started to realize that the world had dramatically shifted. But he was still a politician. He had to lead his party to victory. So Michael Manley realized in the 1980s that the world had moved ahead of him and that there was nothing he could do. Right? There was nothing he could do. The system had become so rigged that he too realized that he could no longer be an agent of change. Now, is it that we, the people, need to be that agent of change? Is it that we, the people, if we actually put pressure on the system, that it will have to change? But the savior, whether it's Michael Manley or Mia Mottley or it's Irfan Ali, these leaders are controlled. Now, how much money these islands borrowed since independence and how much money they pay themselves, that's a good research that need to be, and I agree here. How much of our monies that they have stolen? in other words, that should have gone into the system to take care of our people? That's a good question. And people who are guilty should go to prison. Absolutely. Now, Pedro Jamot is saying, I think you should compare how Anguilla, Montserrat, and the islands that remain a colony to the so-called independence. But yes, but they have, I'm sure they enjoy some economic, privileges, if you will. But at the end of the day, their identity. When you speak to Puerto Ricans, they don't like the fact that they are just a commonwealth of the United States. They don't see themselves like a Dominican who has, forged a national identity. Puerto Ricans are still viewed as, part of the American landscape, right? And they don't like that, even though they have the opportunity to go to the United States and so forth and so on, and they have certain privileges because of being, an American citizen, or not citizen, but Commonwealth. They have their. But the fact of the matter, identity is something that people treasure and that they want. And that's the whole matter of why we actually sought independence. We don't want to live under the sort of image or, symbolisms of the colonial leaders. I ended with this thought. Norman Manley, when he went to fight for Great Britain in World War I, he left Jamaica as a very respected person coming out of Jamaica, right? And many of the other soldiers who left Jamaica, some of whom were probably whites and very high brown people, right? And when they went to Great Britain, they learned that they were not a part of that class. Even though some of them were really brilliant and were well educated and sophisticated, the British people never accepted them as British citizens. The people of the Windrush generation also, who went to Britain from Barbados, from Jamaica, from Trinidad, from other Caribbean countries, they recognized as soon as they landed in Great Britain that even though at the time we were under British colonialism, they were not regarded as British citizens. The British did not see them as British, even though they saw themselves as British, right? And that is why this whole matter of independence had to be forged. Another thing is that Great Britain was struggling after World War II. Great Britain could not struggle and carry these islands on her shoulder. So she was the one who approached our leaders like Norman Manley and asked for them to ink out an agreement for independence. So many people think that Great Britain just gave up the colonies. She gave them up because she could no longer afford to take care of them. We did not fight for our independence. Neither did we initiate really the process. It was just placed on us because of the fact that Great Britain was struggling economically and had fallen as this great empire that the world had seen in its heydays. Right? So there are some things that we have to know, some misconceptions of colonialism and independence that we have to get rid of, that we were the ones who initiated independence and we asked for independence. No, right? We didn't initiate independence, neither did we ask for it. The fact is that Great Britain could no longer afford colonies after World War II. And these are the things that Michael Manley and all these people were struggling with and they had to deal with. And they were pretty much more well-read and sophisticated than we are in our era. And they did the best that they could. Now we are in our era and we're suffering from real intellectual deficit, right? Where we don't understand our countries. We don't even understand the history of our nation states, many of us. We hear some of it. We've read some of it. But we have not gone in depth in studying of it. And neither are we making connections with what happened during history and what we're seeing happening now. How are we therefore going to negotiate? How are we going to navigate this very difficult path when many of us stand at a time when the Caribbean and its elites in terms of the reigning oligarchs are stealing and they do not want to share the wealth with the majority of people? How are we going to continue in the sort of struggle? That's the question that I think needs to be asked and answered. But it's too difficult, and unfortunately, we will never get an answer. A deal was made? Yes, a deal was made, absolutely. Correct. Pedro is right. A deal was made. Right? Just like how Trump is making deals around the world. A deal was made. And the deal was, what was the deal? The deal was that the system should not be altered, should not be reformed, right? The structural system should remain intact. That was the deal. And that was when, Michael Manley came now and he was trying to change it. They attacked him. Because the leaders are allowed to go so far and no more. Because they control. They controlled it, right? So the deal, yes, the deal was. And the deal was to have us still enslaved, which we still are. Okay, any questions? Any more comments? Only Gemma is talking. Everybody is now silent, so I think we can end the line. The nations who gained independence from Great Britain remained the British Commonwealth. A bold trick. Correct. Correct. So you can still be a part of us, but we will not be, enmeshed in having to take care of you. The response of taking care of you, your health care, your education is too much. And Great Britain was not willing to keep us and to keep her nation in debt, because she would have to keep her nation in debt. She'd have to borrow for education to keep our hospitals alive and functioning. So give it to them and let them struggle. That's what they did. And they gave us nothing, absolutely not even a red cent to grow and to continue, having extracted all of the wealth from us over the many years, right? So yeah, that's why they're doing better. They're doing better, and that is not any rocket science why they're doing better. Not because they're smarter, but because they're they're more evil. Independence Day is such the psyop each year. It is a psyop, but then it gives the people some sort of bread and circus to chew on, so that they can continue behaving themselves. Behave yourself and be happy with slavery. And that's exactly what they're doing. The socialists will share the wealth, but keep in mind of how that ends up. Now, remember now that Michael Manley wasn't a socialist. There's a difference. He's a social democrat. There's a difference between being a social democrat. In fact, Michael Manley was more of a capitalist, but he believed that capitalism should have a social component, in terms of distributing the wealth. So one end of society, like a small segment of society, should not be the one to be enriched while the masses remain poor. All right. But Michael Manley was not a socialist. And most, what do you call them? Fabian socialists are not Marxist, and they're not socialist in the full sense of the word, right? They just believe that capitalism, if it is used, should be used in the interest of enriching the masses, and not even enriching, allowing them to live a decent standard of living. I don't think Michael Manley was thinking about the population would have been wealthy. What he was saying is that the population was too destitute, right? Too much illiteracy, poverty. People didn't have homes, right? They didn't have access to healthcare and all of that stuff. So to education, to uplift their minds and to elevate their thinking. So he thought that that should be, if you want a cohesive society, you can't have this great breach between the rich and the poor. The gap was too wide. And Michael Manley was saying, let's, deal with this. Let's improve it. Right? But he was not a socialist, and he was neither a communist, which many people leave and say that he was, but he wasn't. The king is the head of state for the Commonwealth. Yes, it is, on paper. But the United States controls in the sense of economic. It's the economic and military empire. So head of state doesn't mean anything. Head of state means a lot to us, right? But not to the United States. It's nothing. If the United States wants to invade, what's his name? Barbados, before they became a republic, the United States could invade Barbados, right? Because Great Britain would not do anything to protect Barbados, right? So that is what we have to understand. Any other question, comment? The person who asked me to do Fabian socialism, Jesus, you asked me to do it and you barely are saying anything. Yet you asked me to do that. I'm not saying what you want me to say, but this is what it's about. The Fabian socialism. Let's recap. We understand that the socialist Fabian socialism does not mean that they're Marxist. It just means that they are what? They mean they want reform. They want to reform society so that the capital, the economics will have some amount of equity. Okay? So that's what we have to understand. All right, so that is it for the live this afternoon, this evening. Stephen Knight, you're late today. Let me see. Yes. Welcome to the live. Yes, it's just a little title, doesn't mean anything. Right. Yes. Yeah. Correct. And President Jamal was saying Hitler was a socialist Democrat and the world joined Stalin to fight him. Strange now, quite strange, right? But many people go to England and they like it. They like what they see in France, and other Western European states, in Spain, So they think that the standard of living there is not bad. We're in terms of free healthcare and free education and stuff like that. Barbados, I would say, is sort of a socialist state, isn't it? It's sort of Fabianism in terms of its orientation, right? I don't know what is happening there now. I would think it's more of a neoliberal state under Miss Mia Mottley, but before the IMF and all of that stuff, it was. Thank you so much, Trevor, as usual, and you made the discussion even more so excellent because of your excellent and profound comments. Always thinking on your feet, and that is what I like about you and your ability to think. And that is what we're here for. Whether we agree or disagree, we are here to think and to make sure that we're just not listening and accepting what we're told by our colonial masters. And that's what it's about. Any other question? Any other? Because we are living in some very difficult times. And I think neoliberalism is not an ideology. That's what I should say. It's a make-believe economic theory. It's not a theory. I don't even know. I think it's a military operation. I think it's more a military. I won't want to call it a theory because it's not a theory. It's a military idea to control people, but it's not an economic theory. It has no base and should have been thrown out of the bath. Even the baby along with it should go, right? We don't need any, not even the shadow of neoliberalism, because it's a wicked economic system, right? Because for you to tell us that the markets should control everything that happens in the economy, with the government having no sort of say of how to regulate, and the government should know how his or her economy works, right? Mia Mottley should know what's happening to Barbados, how much he needs for healthcare, how much he needs for education, etc., etc. But they're saying, no, we are the ones who tell you what to do, and you have to, because you have to listen to the markets. Now, how can you listen to the markets? The markets don't care about you, right? And it's like the algorithm. The markets is like the algorithm. So they're telling me that, everything depends when I call YouTube. Everything depends on the algorithm. It doesn't. Yeah, I don't have a say because it depends on the algorithm. The algorithm, everything is left up to the algorithm, and that's why the videos don't go out. And then they blame you that, you're the one not having good discussions, right? That's how they do it. The algorithm doesn't want to send out the videos. Look at the live. The algorithm could have sent it to many more people. It chooses not to do so. So we have Pedro Jamal says, who the Fabians serve? That's a good question. I would think the Fabians serve the same people. But the fact is that even among the elites, what we have to understand, even among the elites, you have disagreements. So let us say, for example, during slavery, as I was saying, in America, the president and his supporters, that's Abraham Lincoln, they wanted some reforms to slavery, right? But they didn't want the system to end. Okay. So, but the same people who controlled slavery, so some people had a different view to it, because you know what? They're saying if we keep this sort of economic system where there is a rabid difference and rift between the the classes, among the classes, then you could have a revolution that also destroys our wealth. So what they're saying, what the Fabian socialists are saying, try to give the poor people some of it, share the wealth with some of the people, because if you don't, then you might end up having a definite revolution, which could see, just like what happened in France, the French Revolution, and you could see that the entire society is up in ruin. Pedro is saying, we have free healthcare, but you'll die trying to get some free. Just like England and Canada also. They complain the same thing in Canada and England, that you'll take a long time to even get an appointment. And that's what the Americans do. Oh, in Canada, you have free healthcare. But in Canada, the system of healthcare, is, I understand, is not very good in terms of the waiting, how long you have to wait. France has perhaps some of the best, if not the best, social nets for its people built into its labor laws and educational opportunities I have ever seen. Yes, I always thought, why not other places too? Because their system was also built on the French Revolution, but that is also going to be upended, because the United States is calling for them also to invest in the defense there in France. Trevor is saying, can't blame the migrants going there, but it's turning into a dumpster fire all across that side of the world. It is. Because right now, the more they have wars going on, the United States is, and the US is right. I don't know why Europe went and went into the Ukraine with, they should have allowed the United States to do whatever it wants to do. Now they're caught in it, and it's going to be something that they will have to sit in, because the US is saying, we are not going to pay your bills now. You have to pay your defense bills. So they will have to redirect some of those money into the military in their respective countries. So all of these social security networks will be removed. I think you might see many Caribbean citizens leaving France, leaving the United Kingdom, going back to the Caribbean, because they are going to suffer. Many are going to suffer because of what is happening. Animal farm, you'll end up in. Correct. So this is a great discussion, and we don't want to exhaust it. I think it's enough for people to have the replay and sit and listen. Remember now to share the live, like it, so we can get it sent to as many people on the platform. Thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you in the next live, maybe on Tuesday. Thank you so much. All the best. Ciao.